Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 2026 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio and video of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening, and I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Item 2 is a disclaimer. Members of the public are cautioned against taking any action as a result of a council decision until such time as they have seen a copy of the minutes or been advised in writing by the council's administration with regard to any particular decision. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member, that's me, and in accordance with Council Resolution 226/032, a table of my formal engagements, meetings and events since the last council meeting is available within the ordinary council meeting agenda. Item 4 is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies, which is nil for this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, which is also nil for this evening. Item 5 is declarations of interest, and there's a few here, so bear with me. I'll read them out. Mayor Greg Milner, that's me. I've declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as I know a number of the members of the Royal Perth Golf Club. Councillor Stephen Russell has declared a financial proximity and impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as my property is on the Heritage Survey. Adjacent properties to my property are on the Heritage Survey. I know of persons whose properties are on the Heritage Survey. Councillor Kathy Lees has made an declaration of an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as prior to my election as a ratepayer, I made a request to the city that 49 Forest Street, South Perth, which is proposed to be included on the draft amended local heritage survey for advertising. I also have friends who are members of the Royal Perth Golf Club, which is also proposed to be included. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. However, I declare that I will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Councillor Kathy Lees has also declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.6 as I am a co-founder of the South Perth Tree Canopy Advocates and a co-founder and committee member of the WA Tree Canopy Advocates, and I note that the application involves removal of regulated trees. While there may be a perception that my impartiality interest may be affected, I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Councillor Bronwyn Moore has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as my son attends Wesley College. I'm also involved in a volunteer capacity with Raise Me Up Incorporated, which took over from the Home Karrawara Food Relief Program, a program previously supported by the City of South Perth. Raise Me Up Incorporated received a donation on 13 March 2026 from a charity golf day associated with the Royal Perth Golf Club. These associations may give rise to a perceived impact on my impartiality. Councillor Tim Howling has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as I know some people whose names are included within the heritage list. Secondly, in respect of the Royal Perth Golf Club, some friends of mine play golf. Thirdly, in respect of the Royal Perth Golf Club, a separate arm, the Charity Golf Day Association or Charity, has funded the Raise Me Up Incorporated, of which I was a member up until December and made a donation to it. The St Columba's Church. I attended a baptism once there about 2 years ago. In respect of Wesley College, Ross Barron is a person I know and spoke to him about the inclusion of some buildings, as I indicated previously, that are to be included on the heritage list. Councillor Jacqueline Raison has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 As one of my children attended Wesley College, and in recent years I participated in strategy think tanks at Wesley College with other business leaders. Prior to 23 March 2026, no property or heritage matters were discussed with me by anyone at Wesley. On 23 March 2026, I was contacted by a representative of Wesley, and on 24 March 2026 and 23 April 2026, I had a general discussion with them about this item. In my capacity as a councillor for Mill Point Ward, members of the community have contacted me about the heritage status of the property referred to as St Columba's Church Group. I'm comfortable that I do not have any conflict of interest and can consider this agenda item impartially. Councillors, does anyone else have any interests that they wish to declare this evening? Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. An impartiality interest in 10.1.1. A person in my family is a member of the Collier Pines Ladies Golf Club that plays at Collier Park. And 10.3.1, there is a member of the Royal Perth Golf Club who is known to me.
All right, thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillors, any further declarations that anyone wishes to make this evening? No, okay. In that case, we move on to item 6, which is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous public questions taken on notice, and responses to questions from the public taken on notice at the March 2026 Ordinary Council meeting can be found in the appendix of this agenda. Item 6.2 is public question time. Before I do open public question time, I'd like to remind everyone that this section is for questions only. Preamble is to be kept to a minimum, and I ask that everyone refrain from using any language that could be considered offensive, objectionable or defamatory. I now open public question time at 7 minutes past 6 p.m. We've received 2 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting, and I'd like to begin by inviting Dr. Julian Verncombe of South Perth up to the microphone. Welcome to you, Dr. Verncombe, and we look forward to your questions. So just, that's right, the table right there, if you sit down, the microphone's just been activated.
The Main Street Esplanade intersection is an important public location in South Perth. It's the centre of the entertainment precinct for South Perth. It's a well-used green space. It's a ferry transport hub, and there's a significant children's playground there. The Swan Canning Waterways Authority advised me on the 13th of January 2026, and I've copied that to the council here, that the toilets at that location are the responsibility of the City of South Perth. I assume that to be the case because I copied it and nobody has replied. Could you please explain why were the toilets allowed to deteriorate? Why were the toilets closed? Why was replacement or repair not planned for? Why has there been no action for the last 12 months?
You're going a little bit off script here, Dr. Verncombe. Can I get you to read the question that you've submitted?
Well, I've submitted it, so you've got it.
I do, which is why I know you've gone a little bit off script. Can I get you to read that specific question?
I think that what I'm saying is more or less along the lines.
All right.
It's more precise.
I'll read the question for you then. So the question that you submitted was as follows. Could the city please explain why there are still no practical working toilets available at Main Street? Could the city also please clarify why emails raising simple and practical issues are not being answered with clear and timely responses? And I'll direct that question to Ms Danielle Catalini.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the Chair. The toilets are currently located on the Main Street Jetty, which is actually a Department of Transport and Major Infrastructure facility. The City is continuing to work with the department, who is responsible for the funding and delivery of the installation of a new toilet amenity, which is looking at city-managed land. So in the next budget, the 26-27 financial year budget, the city has allocated funds, which are subject to council approval, for the city to assist the Department of Transport site with identification and associated preliminary site investigation works.
Thank you, Ms Catalani, and thank you, Dr Viencombe, for the question.
So I can't ask another question because, I mean,
No, there's a
answer
process.
was totally...
Okay, Dr Viencombe, works much better if you don't try and talk over the top of me. The way public question time works is you get to submit your questions in advance. They get answered by the city administration, but you don't then get to ask subsequent follow-up questions. So it's the same way that I've treated everyone else that's come before this council during my time as mayor. You're more than welcome to submit further questions. I have seen your emails come in. I'm happy to go back and have a look at them again, but the bottom line is they're not our toilets. They belong to the state government. We're looking at potentially building another facility, which is what Ms Catalani said, but whatever you've been told by someone else, they're not our toilets. Thank you very much for your question. I'd now like to invite Ms Bronwyn David of South Perth. Welcome to you. The microphone is yours, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, administration staff. Nice to see you again. Tonight you will be considering at agenda item 10.3.1 advertising the newly amended Heritage Survey. Section 104 of the Heritage Act 2018 is headed Purposes of Local Heritage Survey. These purposes for a local government, in brief, are identifying and recording heritage places, providing a cultural and historical record of its district, and providing an accessible public record of places of cultural heritage significance to its district. My first question is, does anything in section 104 impose any obligation in any way on an owner of a heritage place?
Thank you for the question. Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, Section 104 of the Heritage Act 2018 only sets out the purposes of a local heritage survey by a local government.
Thank you. My second question is, could the owner of a property on the heritage survey, not the heritage list, but the survey, alter their property in any way or even demolish it without legal consequence?
Thank you. Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Ms Mayor. Yes, subject to a demolition permit being received and if the place is not also contained on the heritage list or the state register. If the place is on the heritage list or the state register, development approval would first be required to be obtained.
My third question is, do owners' opinions or attitudes in relation to their property feed into the information used to determine the heritage significance of a place, or is an assessment based on independent, expert and historical evidence of cultural significance rather than owner support?
Thank you. Ms Shaw.
Thank you. The assessment of a place may seek and consider input from any stakeholder likely to have information, knowledge or interest in its heritage values, which may include past and present owners and occupants. Whilst the guidelines for local heritage surveys states that objections unrelated to heritage significance should not be entertained as a reason for exclusion or removal of a place from a local heritage survey, nothing in Part 8, Local Heritage Surveys of the Heritage Act 2018, precludes the local government from taking into account matters not set out in the guidelines.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Shaw, and thank you, Ms David, for the questions. I'm just going to check with governance to see if there's any late questions in the tray. No, there's not? Okay. In that case, I now close public question time at 14 minutes past 6 p.m. That brings us to item 7, which is confirmation of minutes and notes. Before I do that, councillors, does anyone wish to speak to any of the confirmation of the minutes set out at items 7.1.1 through to 7.1.4? Councillor Russell?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I've just got a query regarding the SCM held on the 16th of April 2026. So there's actually a confidential item with that meeting, and that hasn't been presented on the big tin can. I can't seem to find it.
Who should I send that to, folks? Mr Hindle?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I had a look today and it was on the big tin can. It might be under a different file due to the nature of the contents within it, but it is on the big tin can, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The second question is there any reason why the minutes of that meeting haven't been made public?
Mr Hindle?
Yeah, so the confidential portions have been appropriately presented as a separate confidential attachment in accordance with section 523 of the Act, as the matters contained within are sensitive and relate to the recruitment or employment of the CEO. This is the measure we have undertaken to the extent necessary to ensure that the matters dealt with at the meeting were confidential.
So there's no, surely it should still be minutes,
Yeah.
which are non-confidential on the public webpage.
Can confirm they're on the website.
I'm looking at it, it's not.
Yeah, 16th
Now
of
it
April
is.
20.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? No. Okay, in that case, I'll now seek a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. Those items are 7.1.1, Ordinary Council Meeting held 24 March 2026, 7.1.2, Special Council Meeting held 25 March 2026, 7.1.3, Special Council Meeting held 31 March 2026, and 7.1.4, Special Council Meeting held 16 April 2026. Could I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. A seconder? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillor Russell, you've still got your light on. Is that an oversight? Okay. Councillors, does anyone oppose? No. In that case, I'll declare that carried unanimously. Item 7.2 is notes of briefing. So I'll call for someone to move that council notes the following briefings and workshops were held. That's 7.2.1, concept briefings and workshops, and 7.2.2, council agenda briefing 21 April 2026. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Lees, thank you. Someone to second. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, does anyone oppose? No. Okay, then I declare that carried unanimously. Item 8 is presentations. Item 8.1 is petitions, which is nil. Item 8.2 is gifts or awards presented to council. That's nil for tonight. And item 8.3 is deputations. And deputations were heard at the council agenda briefing held on 21 April 2026. Item 9 is method of dealing with agenda business. And I'll now seek confirmation from the Acting Chief Executive Officer, Ms Anita Amprimo, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda were discussed at the April council agenda briefing. Ms Amprimo.
I confirm that's correct.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. So, with the exception of those items to be withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by this, I mean the officer recommendation will be adopted as is without discussion or amendment. The following items have been withdrawn for discussion tonight. Those items are 10.1.1, E quote WLG, number of zeros 4, provision of Collier Park Golf Course underground services upgrade. The reason for that is an absolute majority is required, and also Councillor Tim Howling has an alternative motion. Item 10.3.1, entitled Draft Amended Local Heritage Survey, advertising. The reason for that is Councillor Stephen Russell has declared a financial proximity and impartiality interest. Item 10.5.1 has been withdrawn. That's entitled Minutes of the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting held on 10 March 2026. The reason for that is Councillor Tim Howling has an alternative motion. And also item 10.5.2, entitled Risk Management Quarterly Report. The reason for that is Councillor Tim Howling has an alternative motion. Councillors, does anyone wish to withdraw any other item for discussion this evening? No. Okay. So I'll now call for a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. Those are items 10.3.2, proposed management order for Bush Forever Site 333, 10.3.3, proposed change of use, grouped dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 1, number 27, capital A, Pether Road, Manning. Item 10.3.4, proposed change of use, grouped dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 5, number 16, Saunders Street, Como. Item 10.3.5, proposed change of use, multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 22, number 22/181, Mill Point Road, South Perth. Item 10.3.6, proposed 2 group dwellings, Lot 23, number 72, Como Street, Como. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments, March 2026. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, March 2026. And item 15.1.1, assignment of sublease, boat shed restaurant /cafe. May I have a mover, please? Councillor Brenda Brandis, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor Raison, thank you. Councillors, does anyone oppose? No. Okay. In that case, those items have just been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law, and the officers' recommendations have been accepted by Council. We'll now be moving on to those reports identified to be withdrawn for discussion. The first of those is item 10.1.1, equote WLG4, provision of Collier Park Golf Course underground services upgrade. As stated, an absolute majority is required for this item, and Councillor Howling has submitted an alternative motion. Councillor Howling, I will give you first bite of the cherry if you wish to move your alternative motion first, but before I do, Standing Order 10.1 capital A, sub-Standing Order 3, says that an alternative motion must relate to the subject matter of the officer recommendation, but may suggest a course of action different from the course of action stated in the officer recommendation. I did have some trouble as to whether all 12 points of your alternative motion did indeed relate to the subject matter of the officer recommendation. I sought some advice. The advice was it's borderline and at my discretion. I'm going to allow it, but I suppose for all councillors, when we do have an alternative motion, let's just be cognisant that the standing orders do require them to be relating to the subject matter of the officer recommendation. With that, Councillor Howling, would you like to, I was going to say read your alternative motion. You're welcome to if you want to, but I suppose if we've got it all up on the screen, it's a long one. It's up to you whether you read it out or simply move it.
I think standing orders require it to be read out.
I'm not sure it does, but let's go with that for the time being. If you'd like to proceed to read it out then.
If I could just make clear, the first 3 proposals are consistent with the officer's recommendation, and that is that Council accepts the e-quote submitted by Saltair Infrastructure Proprietary Limited for the provision of the Collier Park Golf Course underground upgrade in accordance with W404 for the period of 12 months. Authorise the Chief Executive Officer to execute the contract with Saltair Infrastructure Proprietary Limited for the provision of the Collier Park Golf Course underground service upgrade, and adopts an amendment to the 2024-5-26 annual budget to address the 132 funding shortfall to be managed through the reciprocation of the Collier Park Golf Course project budgets already approved for capital infrastructure in 25-26 program. 4, advise Council in respect of the risk of any damages to which the Council may be subject in respect of any responsibilities of Council under either the underground services contract or related agreements, including the developer services agreement. 5, advise Council whether any additional potential costs associated with the Collier Park Golf Course might arise either under the underground services contract, the development services agreement or related agreements. 6, advise Council in respect of the risk associated with recouping the funds loaned from WA Treasury and to keep Council informed from time to time. 7, consider whether there is any opportunity to recover any cost relating to the underground services from Club Links. 8, identify and report to Council any other works that may be outside the 19.8 million capped project costs. 9, if required, inform Treasury in respect of any requirement in relation to the circumstances of the loan and any debt guarantee fee to which the WATC loan facility to satisfy WA Treasury policies in respect of to any of these risks. 10, conduct an independent review of the $116 million revenue model to determine whether the assumptions contained within the model that underpin the business case might remain accurate, and if not, determine the risk to return. 11, review whether the arrangement with Clubrinks is a matter that ought to have been the subject of review of the competitive advantage to private operator through government-backed financing and the risks that are involved in the project, and what report ought to be obtained to ameliorate any such risks. 12, evaluate the compliance of WA Treasury, that's WATC, financing with the state debt neutrality principles, including the Intergovernmental Agreement on the National Competition Policy, regarding the removal of the net competitive advantages, focusing on dot point 1, the risk of Council's failure to interrogate competition impacts, dot point 2, potential conflict with principles designed to ensure a level playing field between the public sector backed entities and private sector businesses, and dot point 3, is this arrangement within the scope of the local government services of a local government as prescribed by the Local Government Act, and whether any financial services licence or property have been in place before on loaning money. So those are the 12 motions with those dot points so put.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillors, does anyone wish to second Councillor Howling's motion? Alternative motion, Councillor D'Souza. Councillor Howling, it's been seconded. The floor is yours for your reasons.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question raised, and certainly it has been the subject, as you could appreciate, of considerable discussion together with the Acting Chief Executive Officer and Mr Morgan. That caused me to review, as is included as it happens on the hub, the Developer Services Agreement, the tender and various other documents. Consistent throughout and over a period of time, Council was informed that the full scope of the project costs for Collier Park Golf Course upgrade was $19.8 million. The costs that we see before us today of an additional $132,000 was described last week for the purposes of the public toilets, which are on the golf course site itself and obviously not available to members of the public itself. I don't want to stand in the way of enabling this e-quote to be awarded, but I do wish to seek that we review the costs, review the way within which we potentially may be subject to other costs or damages, and determine what the nature and extent of our liabilities are. Now, certainly, and I mean this is no criticism because the Acting Chief Executive Officer got across this material very quickly, but at least my review of the Developer Services Agreement does not demonstrate how the city might be exposed to any damages. To the contrary, included within the Developer Services Agreement is in fact an indemnity to the Council in circumstances where there may be any cost overruns and the like. The costs are to be shared if there is a cost overrun, and in any event, as I understood from Council minutes, but not from any other documents, it was limited, the exposure of the Council was limited to the $19.8 million, for which the city is responsible for $11.3 million. Now, it does occur to me that if there is a cost overrun at this early point of $132,000 associated with the construction of sewerage infrastructure to replace the septic tanks which are on site, and I divert to say that at least under the health guidelines, building of septic tanks in these sorts of locations with the nature of the deep white sand that is in this location would not be objectionable. The Health Department guidelines and policies would enable alternate treatment facilities to be readily used at a site such as this. But nevertheless, it is the case that the proposed works for the upgrade of the sewerage is connected. It may be that at some future point there was a requirement to at least upgrade the on-site effluent disposal of the septic tanks, but at this point in time, the need for the construction of the sewerage system is directly related to the development for which the city is already on the hook for 19.8 million, although from a profit split arrangement, Club Links has proposed to make a deferred liability of $8.5 million. Now, the difficulty that I have is that when I look at this project, it was accepted by council at the time on the basis that it would take in $116 million by way of revenue over a 21-year period, justifying certain expenses. I'm concerned that this may well be the tip of the iceberg if we allow Club Links to, in effect, if I could use those words advisedly, to press the city and the ratepayers of the local government to stump up these costs, which are directly, in my view, associated with the works. And I say that, and I've explained that in the explanatory memorandum, how they are connected with the works, because consistently all councillors were informed that the totality of the costs was going to be 19.8 million. When I spoke to 2 or 3 councillors very recently in the last week who have left council, they all confirmed they had always understood and been told that 19.8 million was the totality of the cost of the project, and that there were not likely to be any cost overruns that may be visited upon the council. Although they may have been told this, at least there is some scope for cost overruns to be shared between Club Links and the council where there are certain criteria. This, and I say this very definitely, this is directly connected with the upgrade of the facilities at the Collier Park Golf Course, and to anticipate that the ratepayers are going to be required to stump up now and stump up into the future. Now, I can foreshadow that I will be asking a question in a moment.
That's 5 minutes, Councillor Howling. I'll move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Would anyone care to second that? Councillor Prendeville, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that Councillor Howling be granted a further 5 minutes to speak. That was unanimous. Please continue, Councillor Howling.
Thank you, and thank you to council. I should indicate that I will be asking whether or not there are, and in fact my motion indicates that, but whether there are likely to be or have been any other cost overruns of any nature whatsoever that the ratepayers have needed to bear. It seems to me that this would be something that we would need to, at least from a commercial perspective, given we're playing in the commercial sandbox now, be ensuring that we've got proper advice. I assure you, councillors, working in business, when it starts off at 132,000, it moves to 250,000. If we are going to accept this at this particular point in time, we are at risk. Now, I have to tell you that in August, there was some sewerage works which were identified on the agenda, but they were going to be, at least from what appeared at the agenda in August last year, that they were going to be conflated and joined in the whole overall project. And so there was some discussion about still doing the scoping works in respect to those sewerage works. There was nothing that has ever been brought back to council to say that the sewerage works would be something separate and distinct and on its own and separate from the project. When I looked at the tender documents, in fact, that also confirmed to me the contrary was the position because council was never expressly drawn to their notice. So I must emphasise that I've looked at the developer services agreement on the hub. I've looked at the tender, all of the explanation documents around the tender documents and what council was informed in various workshops by way of the documents. Now, there's a separate issue, and it's this. Local government, when it borrows money from WA Treasury and then on-borrows it, even if it increases it by 2%, is still providing debt money to a private enterprise at less than the market rate they might otherwise have. In other words, they're using that's the local government's borrowing power. Now, at least it might be possible to do that. I'm never comfortable with private enterprise borrowing from a local government money that it borrows separately from WA Treasury and puts ourselves on the hook. I'm not comfortable with it. But nevertheless, it was an agreement that had been undertaken. What I'm worried about is that when we did that, we didn't enter into state debt neutrality requirements or comply with the intergovernmental agreements in respect of competition policy. In other words, there is an argument to at least say that we ought to have ensured, when we were granting this money, that we were doing so and not distorting the market, that everything was on a very level playing field, that Collier Park wouldn't be able to suddenly become a better golf course because it had access to state government finances through the City of South Perth. It does worry me when I look at the budget for the return that in the past it's presented to the local government. It has not been that significant. Sometimes it got up to around 300,000 to 400,000, but we've got to bear in mind that the city is responsible for mowing the lawns and doing all of the greenkeeping, from what I could see, what I read this afternoon. So the return would want to, at least my perspective, be higher. Now, I don't know how much has been allowed in the FAT for contingencies. Ordinarily, it's usually about 10%. 10 in the present market, everybody's putting their contingencies a bit higher. Now, it might be that if in the project there is a 20% contingency because of the current market, I don't know. But I do see risk. And that's why I'm saying that all of these matters are interrelated. They're all part of the one project, the project to deliver to Collier Park Golf Course a development that we are responsible to ensure we fund. I don't see damages, contrary to what is stated at least in paragraph 4. That's as a result of, and I mean that no disrespect to anybody, I don't see the damages prospect at the present time because we're not party to that agreement.
30 seconds, Councillor Howling.
I accept that we may want to at least do 1, 2 and 3, but I ask that it's conditional upon the rest of the motion or the rest of the reasons, because we're not a bank propping up private enterprise in the hope for a return, and we shouldn't get into business. And there's risk in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillor D'Souza, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. All very good points by Councillor Howling. I think this is a very timely motion and it raises important points around due diligence for us as a council. We approved this project a long time ago on various assumptions, and I take the Mayor's point that some parts of this motion might be a bit broader, but given that it is close to a $20 million project, I think it is appropriate to consider these points now. My main consideration in supporting this motion hinges around item 7 or clause 7, which to me is basically answering or asking the question, is it a good deal for ratepayers? This is a joint enterprise, of course, with Clublinks as the operator, and we have, as a council, had a good relationship with them for many years, but we have to be cognizant that this is, in the scheme of things, sure, people might say 132k isn't much compared to the overall cap, but if this is the first potential sort of change or variation, what other variations or changes will there be down the track which might potentially not be in the favour of the ratepayer? I think as well the review at clause 10 of the revenue model is timely. A lot has changed since council approved the initial project, and I think it's fiscally prudent to review these revenue models. And I think this motion will allow council some time without jeopardising the project, because this particular e-quote absolutely should go ahead. We shouldn't hold that up. But I think it's a good chance for council to, I guess, scrutinise the assumptions a bit more and ensure that the ratepayers are getting good value for money from this project.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak against Councillor Howling's alternative motion? Councillor Raison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Howling for circulating this motion on Friday evening. Speaking against it, I guess there is a few reasons. I'm just not going to speak to paragraphs 1, 2 and 3, but one of the things I think that one of the issues that this raises is whether we are asking the right questions here. I think it is valid to ask a question about competitive neutrality. I think that there are a number of things that may well be answered, a number of these paragraphs that may well be answered factually once we get detailed answers from the administration about the questions that were put on notice. I think there's more than 50 questions that were put on notice. So for me, I'd like to establish some of the factual basis because I haven't got the benefit that other councillors have of tracking this project since its inception. And I have put a request into the administration for a full information pack about the various documents so that we can ensure that we are asking the right question. But naturally, because of the public holiday, I didn't receive those till late this afternoon. The kinds of things that are on my mind about the scope of these questions in relation to paragraph 4 is that it's a very open-ended question for the administration to advise council in respect to the risk of any damages to which council may be subject in respect of its responsibilities. So I think that the scope of that is so open-ended, it probably needs to be grounded whether this is related to the 132,000. I'm not really sure. I have a similar comment in relation to paragraph 5, which is that for the administration to advise council about any additional potential costs that may arise in a way, although I appreciate, even with Councillor Howling, a limited amount of time, I think that is kind of the scope of that crystal ball gazing is a little bit unclear in terms of that being answered in a way that would assist us. And I think the same in relation to paragraph 6 of any risk associated with recouping funds is such a broad-based thing. So for me, I would like to get the factual basis established first by receiving answers to the questions on notice, which I appreciate the detail of those questions. Secondly, I would like to get an information pack from the administration and I'll have an opportunity to look at that. And finally, I would also like to get the administration's perspective on this notice of motion, because there are a number of things which may be worthwhile looking at in terms of reopening projects. Generally, my preference is to look forward rather than look back, but I think there are some valid issues that have been raised. But my understanding is that there was an independent business analyst engaged to develop the business case model. My preference is to hear from the administration on this matter, and I will be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raison. Councillors, would someone like to speak? A question, Councillor Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a few questions on this for the administration. I'll start with the first three. So firstly, point 7 asks us to consider whether there's an opportunity to recover the costs relating to the underground services for Club Links. My first question for the administration would be, would this not ordinarily be part of the process that the administration would undertake as to whether there is any cost recovery and that this is something that you would ordinarily do? Thank you.
Ms Amprima or Ms Loeb? Ms Amprima?
Thank you for the question. So we would need to take some further advice on the agreements to establish whether that was an opportunity or not.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. My second question relates to point 9. So, if required, inform Treasury in respect of any requirement in relation to the circumstances that the loan and the debt guarantee fee to the WATC loan facility to satisfy WA Treasury policies in respect of any of these risks. Again, so the question for the administration is this something that we'd ordinarily do with regard to borrowings from WATC to fund such a project, or does it require council to direct you to have that conversation with WATC and provide that information?
Ms Amprima?
Thank you for the question. So WATC are aware of the purpose of the loan and they have undertaken their assessment of it accordingly.
Thank you very much, Ms Amprima. Another question. Item 10, conduct an independent review of the 116 million revenue model to determine whether the assumptions contained within the model that underpin the business case remain accurate and if not, determine the risk to the return. My question with regard to this is the review that was undertaken, and as Councillor Raison has indicated as well, was independent. My question for the administration is, at this point in time, is there any need to undertake a review of the model based on the assumptions that were made when this was approved?
Ms Ambremo?
The administration isn't aware of anything that would give rise to that. The model and the business case were done at a particular point in time. It's probably fair to say that if they're done at a different point in time, they may come out with a different answer.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Russell, question or wishing to speak?
Question, thank you.
Far away.
Thank you. Reference is made to the Intergovernmental Agreement on National Competition Policy. And I know nothing about these policies, but as it mentions national, then is this policy relates to state agreements, or is it a state to its department or its agency's agreement?
Ms Ambremo, should I send that one your way?
Yeah, look, we would need some further time to consider that aspect.
Thank you. For Treasury, do they perform their own due diligence to ensure that any loans provided satisfy the WA Government Policy Statement on Competitive Neutrality?
Ms Ambremo?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that, whether that is something that they considered. They certainly do their own risk assessment on the loan, but we don't get visibility of that risk assessment.
Okay. And final question, is there some form of value threshold where these policies come into play?
I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Lees, speaking or question?
Just had a question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Far away.
So through you, there was a statement made that the upgrade of the sewer that's before us directly relates to the development of the club links with the golf course. Could you provide some advice on that, please?
Ms Ambremo?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, the existing infrastructure is not performing adequately. So, replacing that is something that has been in consideration for a while. We couldn't go ahead or it wouldn't make sense to go ahead and connect it to sewer when we didn't know where the new building would be. So the timing linking it to the new building is so that we know that the new building, where the new building is, and we can connect the infrastructure into the location of the new building.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Councillor Lees?
Yes, I just had a further question, please. So in the report, it said the city would look at whether there was any opportunity to recover the costs of these works from club links. Oh, sorry, I think it was in the report. It was in response to one of the questions taken on notice. And to me, that seems like an important step, but I was wondering whether that the recommendation needs to be extended to cover that, as Councillor Howling appears to have done, or whether that is something that the city can undertake regardless.
Ms Ambremo?
It can be undertaken without a council resolution. Given the nature of these agreements, we would seek external advice on looking at that avenue, so it's not something we'd look at internally.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Councillors, would anyone like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's alternative motion? Question, Councillor Brenda Brandis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following on from a comment that was made earlier about the toilets not being made available to members of the public, could that be confirmed? Can the public actually access the grounds and actually use the toilets?
Ms Ambremo?
Without checking on the course controller agreement around what ability club links have got to stop anyone from accessing the site, I probably can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brenda Brandis?
Thank you, Director Primo, Acting CEO and Primo. Just a question with regard to the context of this alternative motion. So, understanding at the agenda briefing, the concern was around the cost and whether we could recover this from Club Links, which I understand that the administration can do without any alternative motion or amendment. So just that seems to be the main driver, but there are a number of items that are included to direct the administration to undertake a significant amount of work.
Councillor Brenda Brandis, I've got to be consistent for everyone. Can you restate that succinctly and concisely, please?
Yeah. Apologies, Mr. Mayor. I was just getting to explaining the context. So, in context of the requirement for all of these items to be addressed, in consideration for a $132,000 amendment, does the administration consider this to be a significant burden given the amount of work that's actually required?
Ms Amprima.
Look, we haven't made an assessment as to whether it's a burden or otherwise. If council directs us to do it, then we'll proceed with doing it. Probably can't offer any other comment than that.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you. Just a follow-on question, I believe, to Councillor Brenda Brandis. So as the city have already informed us that the connection to the mains is a necessity, then basically all the procurement costs, the mobilisation costs, the demobilisation costs, the trenches, the trench installation, the backfill, all those costs are already sunk. So in order to find out what the difference is between the extra sewage, should I say, from any future expansion, would require just a procurement of an extra large pipe. So therefore, a hydraulic analysis, I guess. I guess then the question is it really worthwhile for council to actually try to recoup any costs when those costs really could be quite minor?
Ms Amprima.
I'm not 100% sure I follow all of your comments there. We certainly can explore whether there is any avenue where we can recover costs of Club Links. Whether or not that's successful and how much we might be able to recover is a totally different issue.
Thank you, Ms Amprima. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against Councillor Howling's alternative motion who hasn't spoken yet? Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the amended motion or alternative motion before us is very detailed. There's an additional 9 parts, and I haven't had sufficient time to get detailed advice from the administration on them. Several of the proposed actions appear to possibly extend beyond the scope of the matter in this agenda item, as was discussed. And it's revisiting decisions and matters that as a new councillor I wasn't privy to. So because of that, I'm not comfortable supporting the motion at this stage. I think we need clear advice from the city administration about whether these actions are needed, whether they're relevant and whether they all sit within good governance. What I am comfortable with is the city's advice on the tender itself. They've been clear that awarding the tender at this meeting is important, and if we don't award it, that it leads to delays and disruptions, and I'm also and may potentially expose us to damages under the Development Services Agreement. And I'm also comfortable with the advice that the city will look at whether there's any opportunities to recover the costs of these works from Club Links, which I think is an important step, and that can happen regardless of the alternative motion before us. So in wrapping up, I want us to make decisions based on solid advice and good process, and until we have that clarity, I can't support the broader motion, but I do support progressing the tender. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillors, would anyone like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken?
Can I ask a question?
You may.
I foreshadowed two questions when I was speaking. One is, has any advice been received from either a contract superintendent or legal advice as to the ability to recover the $132,000? I do have a second.
Ms Amprema?
So we haven't explored yet whether we have the ability to recover the money.
And your second question, Councillor Howling?
Just a sub to that. I take it that not exploring means we haven't explored with any of the superintendent of the contract or any other legal advice.
I'm just going to caution everyone to be a bit careful about referring to legal advice in the chamber in circumstances where there's at least an argument that if legal advice were to be referred to in the chamber, there is a chance that legal professional privilege could be waived by the act of doing that. Let me finish, Councillor Howling. I'm not sure whether that's relevant in the current case, but just a gentle reminder to all councillors. Ms Amprema?
Yeah, so if I can just clarify that with the changes of some staff recently and the people that are looking after this, I probably don't have access to all the information, but we can certainly look at what we have and whether there is any other information that we're required.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. A final question, Councillor Howling?
Thank you. Is council aware of any other matters, even if it's $1,000, which we might have paid to Club Links or anybody else for any other cost overruns at any stage, no matter how small?
Ms Amprema?
I'm not aware of any other costs that we've paid to Club Links outside of the agreement.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's alternative motion who hasn't spoken yet? No. Is there anyone else who would like to speak against who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking against this alternative motion for a few reasons, primarily because we have 9 additional directions on the administration to undertake what should be for a straightforward process to engage a supplier to undertake some work. The value of that work is $132,000 in comparison to the total capital construction of the project of $19.8 million. That represents 0.67%. So that's not even 1% of the total cost. I appreciate that prices might escalate, but we've got a very discrete piece of work here. I understand the administration can undertake a review as to whether cost recovery is possible and whether it is appropriate, and possibly whether we should be incurring more of those costs because we have direct value to actually attribute to the capital works for the city as a whole. I am concerned about quite a few of the items that have been listed that I consider to be beyond the scope of what this agenda item requires of us. And some of those items include, consideration for any potential, consideration for addressing any changes in the circumstances, the debt guarantee fee, and to keep WATC informed. Now, the administration undertake what is required of their role, and the borrowing with WATC would require reporting and addressing issues as they arise. I'm not sure the direction of the administration to undertake pieces of work such as that are appropriate. The concern raised by Councillor Raison with regard to the risk of any damages, I do see as a concern because is this something that we'd be ordinarily asking with regard to any similar agenda item that was put before us? A review undertaken by the administration is sufficient in reporting back to council on a monthly basis. So we do get a report back every month with regard to our expenditure budget year to date against actual expenditure. And I consider the administration do undertake a very detailed and comprehensive review of our costings. We also do a mid-year review which actually addresses any substantial cost adjustments that need to be made. So I consider a lot of the additional work required to be either beyond the scope of what was required for this agenda item, or to be a considerable impost on the administration for things that they should ordinarily be doing. I accept the officer's recommendation with the 3 points as presented to us tonight, but do not support the alternative motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pardon me. Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's alternative motion who hasn't spoken already? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak against? I'll say a few words. I'll keep it brief because I think the reasons already stated by Councillors Raison, Lees and Brenda Abrandis largely sum up where I was coming from. The item before us is whether we accept a proposal from Saltier Infrastructure Proprietary Limited for the provision of Collier Park Golf Course underground services upgrade. Points 1 to 3 of the alternative motion are identical to the officer recommendation. I'm perfectly fine with that. I do think that at least some of paragraphs 4 to 12 inclusive represent overreach for the purposes of this item. I did give Councillor Howling the benefit of the doubt so that his alternative motion could be heard, but I'm not comfortable supporting it, and I don't think I have enough information to support some of those additional paragraphs. So for that reason, I'm foreshadowing the officer recommendation. I will be voting against this alternative motion. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against who hasn't spoken already? No. Okay. Councillor Howling, you have 5 minutes to rebut any arguments made during debate if you would like to do so.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to council, and I appreciate the debate that's occurred. What am I asking for? I'm asking to be advised in respect of matters of risk. 4, 5, 6, right throughout. It's so that council is informed about the full extent of the project, having previously been informed that the totality of the cost of this project was 19.8 million. Now, I wasn't at those council meetings and I wasn't part of that council that took upon themselves the decision to support this project. But I have undertaken a review of the minutes, and those are available online and we can read them. So we adopt whatever any previous council, constituted differently by different people, have done. Since 2023, there's been a significant change. I can't go into this saying that there is no good basis on which we ought properly to now at least draw to Treasury's notice that there may be some of the principles that would have been expected to have been undertaken by a previous council to now apply and to adopt those. That's about good governance. It's about putting up your hand and saying, we might not have strictly stuck to this. It's about being an exemplar. It's about being a leader. And certainly in my business, I expect that of every ethical decision, that if there's something that goes wrong, that people say, this is what we got wrong, this is how we're going to rectify it, and this is what we're going to do about it. Now that is good governance. That's consistent with the way within which we all ought to operate. Now we've got a project where previous councils were told the extent of the cost was going to be 19.8 million. Next time you tell your ratepayers that you can't afford to spend something, you need to be able to explain why it was so easy for you to adopt an expense of $132,000 on this project, which is clearly, in at least my view from the reading of the documents. I'm not just pulling this out of the sky and I'm not fully informed as if there is some need for some extra specialist advice about this matter. I'm informed This is solid advice. I've read the documents, I've read the agenda, and I've read the materials. So I know what's in the Developer Services Agreement after reading it this afternoon. I know what's in the tender. What I think we need is some advice. We need to know, is there going to be any other costs? How much are those costs likely to be? Could it be, is there some risks around this? Hey, are we going to get our $116 million over 21 years? Or are we going into business without knowing that? Now, as I sit in this chamber, not a lot of people probably have budgets or sit on boards or companies of budgets of $10, $20 million. But what you need to do is do a business judgment rule. And that means you fully inform yourself of all matters relevant to a decision on which you need to apply your mind. That's contained in the requirements of the regulations now. That you adopt a business judgment, meaning that you apply your mind freely, voluntarily, after having informed yourself of all matters. What this is asking for is that we as council, before we spend $132,000, inform ourselves about, is there any risk of any cost overruns? Can we properly recover the $132,000? Are we being pushed around in the sandpit because we've got easy access to ratepayers' funds? Are we, in fact, taking advantage of our competitive money that we can get from the WA Treasurer and then on loan to a private enterprise to be able to return to us a profit? Was this a good idea? Should we think about this and at least notify the WA Treasury that there's some risks associated with this? These are all relevant questions. This is not just thought up on the spot.
60 seconds, Councillor Howling.
This is all directly connected, with the greatest of respect to a number of councillors who suggested that they thought that it was something completely separate. It's not separate from what's at hand. At hand, what we're talking about is risk. Central to governance is risk. If we can't adopt an approach where we reflect on whether or not we did the best thing, look at the ways in which we can do business better, then we're not really conducting the business of ensuring that we avoid risk into the future. And mark my words, if there's further cost overruns, I will remind everybody in the chamber, if we don't end up saying that this is a good idea, that we needed to, back at this date of this meeting, to review it. In the future, we may need to review it. I ask your support because all we're asking for is advice. That's the essence of what those motions, additional motions, are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. So, councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Howling's alternative motion to the vote. If it passes, it passes. If it fails, then I have foreshadowed the officer recommendation. So with that, councillors, please cast your votes on Councillor Howling's alternative motion. Okay, the votes are in. The alternative motion has failed. Those who voted in favour were Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Howling, Councillor Prendeville and Councillor Waugh. Those who voted against were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Raison and Councillor Russell. Okay, so the alternative motion has failed. I indicated during debate that I would move the officer recommendation if that happened. So I'm now moving the officer recommendation. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Russell, thank you. Councillors, I don't have a great deal to say. We should accept a proposal for the provision of underground services. The officers are recommending that we accept the proposal from Saltier Infrastructure Proprietary Limited, and I'm prepared to support that recommendation. Councillor Russell, nothing to say? Councillors, does anyone oppose the officer recommendation? Councillor D'Souza, okay, then I won't use my powers under the standing orders to simply carry it unanimously. Would you like to speak against the officer recommendation, Councillor D'Souza?
Nothing further, Mr Mayor.
All right. Does anyone wish to speak against? Councillor Howling.
Yes, I do. Without knowing whether or not the $132,000 is able to be spent only for this works and where it arises from, I'm not prepared to commit ratepayers to spending $132,000 at all. We need further information. I don't have enough information contained within this report. If people say they do, then I'm surprised. I don't know whether the mobilisation, demobilisation, the trenching and what this is for, or whether this is for pipes. Nobody does. And the reason for that, with the greatest respect, is that the report that we've received is particularly brief and light on detail. It doesn't give us sufficient information for any of us to understand what is being proposed. And anybody that's voted against the motion previous and now thinks that they've got sufficient information in this report, I find it bewildering. There is only this. The City of South Perth is seeking a skilled and experienced contractor for the private sewage pumping station, reticulation, fire and water main as detailed in the request. We don't have the request. It's not in front of us. It then says the quotes, and what else is it? There's nothing really, anything further of substance to satisfy any of us to know what we're actually approving and why we're saying that this is necessary. Sure, it says based on the submissions, very little information is given about those submissions. It's recommended that the e-quote submission is accepted. Some more details can be found at confidential item attachment A, but even that information is very brief and is more about the process of the adoption of the tender. I simply say this: at the present, we don't have sufficient information. At the present, I have reviewed what's on the hub, the Developer Services Agreement. It is available to everybody. I wasn't aware that it was there until this afternoon. Having reviewed that, we're not at risk, in my view, of damages. Sure, there could be a risk if we unnecessarily delay beyond a reasonable point in time and are said to cause the delay of the construction for which additional works may need to be undertaken. Could be. But I'm not satisfied that there is a real risk. I want further information. I want to be able to make a proper judgment rule, which is beholden on each and every one of us as councillors. That is, that we have all of the relevant information to make a judgment as to whether $132,000 ought properly to be spent of the ratepayers' money, which is its short supply. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. I guess what you've just said raises a question for me, which I guess is a governance question. And perhaps this is to Mr. Hindle, if I heard Councillor Howling correctly, he said he hasn't got enough information to pass the officer recommendation, but the officer recommendation is identical to paragraphs 1 to 3 of the alternative motion that was just supported. Was paragraphs 1 to 3 in the alternative motion subject to paragraphs 1 through to 12, or am I missing something?
Sorry, what's the question again?
Was paragraphs 1 to 3 of the alternative motion that just failed subject to and conditional upon any aspect of paragraphs 4 through to 12 of the alternative motion?
No.
No, thank you. Okay. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favour? Councillor Raison, by all means.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In going through the background material that was provided, I saw that as part of the e-quote process, the superintendent was from Porter Consulting Engineers. Am I right to assume that that is an independent third party who provided the original estimate, is probably for a simpler word than a indicative development cost pre-e-quote?
Ms Ampremo?
Yes, that's correct. They are an independent consultant.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Councillor Raison?
A follow-up question, just in relation to the decision, and my apologies if it was covered in the agenda briefing and it may be in one of the questions on notice. I'd appreciate understanding why the decision or the recommendation is to use the budget itself rather than the Collier Park Golf Course reserves to cover the shortfall amount of $132,000.
Ms Ampremo?
So the funds are intended to be taken from reprioritising other items on the budget that are funded through the reserve. So it would still effectively come from the reserve. My understanding is there isn't sufficient funds within the reserve itself to fund all of this if we only sought to use the reserve. So we're proposing to fund it by reprioritising other works that are funded through the Golf Course Reserve.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Councillor Raison?
Thank you, and thank you to the Acting CEO for that answer. My understanding from looking at the material is that that reallocation is relating to, it's to defer budget funding that's non-urgent in relation to fleet. Is that the city's fleet, or is this fleet that's related and somehow the ownership is shared?
Ms Anne Premo.
No, so this is relating to the city's fleet that is used for maintenance of the golf course.
Thank you, Ms Anne Premo. Councillors, would anyone like to speak in favour? Councillor Waugh speaking in favour or speaking against?
Sorry, just a question, if I may.
By all means.
The reallocation of funding in respect of the fleet, presumably that's budgeted on what is anticipated costs. Does that mean that in the 26-27 financial year, the costings of the fleet will be more in that year?
Ms Anne Premo.
Yeah, that's potentially the case. So each year, a certain amount of funds are available in the reserve, transferred into the reserve from the income from the golf course operations. So we would anticipate more funds going back into the reserve. So we've basically reprioritised the expenditure so that we can cover the works through the golf course income effectively.
Thank you, Ms Anne Premo. Councillor Waugh.
Yeah, just one more follow-up from that. Is there any risk, I don't know what the fleet is looking like at the moment, but is there any risk that we could then find ourselves short for the fleet this year?
Ms Anne Premo.
So we have made this proposal on the basis that we believe that the risks can be managed adequately.
Thank you, Ms Anne Premo. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Councillor Lees, question?
Sorry, can I ask a question, please, Mr.
Of course.
So there is a response provided that, well, in relation to questions asked last week, that the city may be exposed to damages if it causes delays or interruption, and that's been questioned. Could you please reconfirm and expand on that for me? Thank you.
Ms Anne Premo.
Yeah, so we would need to explore further what the extent of that exposure might be, but I think the comment last week was that there is the potential for that to be the case. We would need to look at all the facts and the circumstances and then work out what exactly the exposure is.
Thank you, Ms Anne Premo. Councillor Lees.
So just following on from that, is it the administration's view that there is a need to pass this or accept this tender or e-quote, sorry, as quickly as possible? What would be the impact of a delay at this point?
Ms Anne Premo.
The impact of the delay could mean that it impacts the main construction works under the Development Services Agreement, and we would need to explore whether the city had any liability in that case or not.
Thank you, Ms Anne Premo. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Councillor Raison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, we can only deal with the steps where we're up to in any project. It would be a wonderful thing if we did have a crystal ball that could tell us every potential damages risk, every potential additional cost risk. The reason that these matters come to us where there are budget variations is that we are required to interrogate them, and I do think that it's a very short period of time since this e-quote was first done indicatively by the external consultant, but nevertheless, here we are, it's only 5 months later. I think it probably is, I looked a little bit into this external consultant. That was my first question is, well, how did we come to this amount in the first place? And just by going by the website of Porter Consulting, it looks like for the last 5 years, they've given civil engineering advice to 40 other local governments across WA. So I have to be satisfied that we have done the right thing in engaging somebody external to the city to give us this quote. And have there been, the next question then is, have there been any major developments that will impact things economically in the last 5 months? And I think the answer, as it says in the recommendation geopolitically, is yes. Will there be more? Possibly. and I would say probably, actually. This is what we're being asked to consider. I think that given the time of year, a decision, if it was earlier in the financial year, I may question the decision to reallocate funding in this way, but given that we're in Q4 of the financial year, I think that it probably is possible for the city to make a call about the fleet and to defer the decision and the costing around that into the next financial year. So, yes, at this point in time, also, given that there is an ability to approach Club Links about contribution, I'll be supporting this so we can move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Raison. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favour? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am supportive of the officer's recommendation as it stands. I feel we have enough information with regard to what the scope of works are in making a decision with regard to this agenda item. It's fairly clear it's an important piece of work that needs to be undertaken. It is relatively insignificant in cost. As I said before, 132,000 represents less than 0.67% of the cost of this capital work, and less than 0.2% of roughly the entire budget for a year. Very small amounts in the scheme of things, a very important piece of work. The administration have undertaken a procurement process, and they do so diligently, and we need to support the officers with this recommendation without creating any additional work for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken? No. In that case, I'll briefly take a moment to rebut any arguments made during debate. There was only one speaker against. Councillor Howling said that he didn't have sufficient information to pass the officer recommendation. Well, it's the right of any councillors to vote against the officer recommendation if they want to. But I would note that the alternative motion contained those same 3 paragraphs, and nothing in paragraphs 4 through to 12 made paragraphs 1 to 3 of the alternative motion subject to or conditional on paragraphs 4 through to 12. So had the alternative motion passed, those same 3 paragraphs would have been passed by council. So I don't really understand the argument there, but that's by the by. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. Suffice to say, we're in a period of well-known volatility when it comes to the prices of works such as these. $132,000. I mean, it would be better if there wasn't that increased cost, but if we're going to conduct business, I fear that's just the reality of the market at this point in time. So with that, I'll put the item to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes on the officer recommendation. And for some reason it says additional time for me to speak, but I think we all know what we're voting on. So, the officer recommendation has been carried, 5 votes to 4. Those who voted in favour were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Raison and Councillor Russell. Those who voted against were Councillor Sousa, Councillor Howling, Councillor Prendeville and Councillor Waugh. Okay, so that was carried by the absolute majority that's required by this particular item. We now move on to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening, which is item 10.3.1, entitled Draft Amended Local Heritage Survey Advertising. Councillor Russell, I note that you've declared a financial proximity and impartiality interest in this item. I'll give you a moment to exit the chamber. All right, folks, so for the benefit of the tape, Councillor Russell has now left the chamber. We've got an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received an amendment. I haven't received an alternative motion. Would someone like to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Lees, thank you. Could we have a seconder, please? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, does anyone oppose the officer recommendation?
Yes, thank you, I do.
Councillor Howling opposes the recommendation, so I won't use my powers under the standing orders to declare the item carried. Councillor Lees, the floor is yours for your reasons.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I support the advertising of the amended local heritage survey as now proposed and would urge all councillors to do the same. I acknowledge the deputation last week by the owner of place number 85, 49 Forest Street, Mr Carmichael, and understand that he is concerned about what heritage listing of his property may mean, but that is not what is before us tonight. We are looking to advertise the local heritage survey. Notwithstanding, I don't think his concerns are necessarily well-founded. As I've said before, the heritage listing doesn't mean a property is frozen in time. It simply means that where alterations are proposed to aspects of a property that are of cultural heritage significance, they need to be done in a sensitive way that respects that significance. Adaptations that are sensitive and extend the life and use of the buildings are the aim rather than demolition. So to this end, where a place is listed, the city or the relevant decision maker may vary any site or development requirement where the proposed variations will facilitate the conservation of a heritage protected place, and that is a very significant provision that heritage owners can take advantage of. So I think that also needs to be recognised. I don't accept his conclusions about the significance of the residents, but that can be borne out during the advertising process. I think we should leave much of that, the significance of the residents in relation to Talbot Hobbs. But I would note that there are a number of other Hobbs, Smith and Forbes houses that are included on the local government heritage lists of other municipalities as category A and B places. I think we should leave the advice on the heritage survey to the experts. A building doesn't need to be ornate and extravagant to be of heritage significance. There is nothing under the heritage legislation that says heritage listing should only apply to public buildings as suggested by Mr Carmichael, and as I said, there are a number of other Talbot Hobbs and Hobbs, Smith and Forbes houses that are on heritage lists within Perth. So as I've said before, I'm keen for the council to look at offering some incentives for owners of heritage places, things like waiving development application fees or even considering rate subsidies. At the end of the day, these owners are looking after places that matter to all of us, and giving them support feels like an important part of what we're here to do for future generations. But what I want to stress is that now really isn't the moment to be debating whether this property should be formally listed and for that matter any other properties. That's not the decision in front of us. Right now we're simply looking at advertising an updated heritage survey. That's the first step in a much longer process, and there are several stages that have to be completed before anyone makes a call on heritage listing itself. These updates come from expert advice, and the survey needs to reflect that advice accurately. It's important that the survey isn't altered or shaped in a way that predetermines an outcome later on. It has to stand on its own as an honest, evidence-based assessment. So at this point, the most sensible thing we can do is allow the proper process to unfold. Despite deciding on heritage listing comes right at the end of that process, not at the beginning. So I would urge you to support the recommendation before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, you were the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I concur with Councillor Lees. The matter before us tonight is consideration for the advertising of the draft amended local heritage survey. This should be accepted as it stands. independent experts have actually undertaken reviews and actually provided their assessments with regard to properties on the amended local heritage survey. We should be accepting this, working through the process, allow the advertising to occur and move forward with the draft amended local heritage survey. I support the officer's recommendation as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Howling.
Thank you. You'll be pleased to know that it's fairly brief. Remember, this is an adoption for the purpose of advertising. Whereas I take issue with the suggestion that the most sensible thing to do is to simply allow the process to unfold and therefore imply somebody who doesn't support it may not be so sensible after all, I am one of those persons who are not so sensible. Maybe it is because I don't take great support in or comfort in what is described as blindly following the report which was put to us and described as the independent experts report. One may carefully remember that I asked a number of questions of the Director of Development Services as to whether or not this complied with the relevant guidelines on which any expert report ought properly to be based. It was found that it was wanting in respect of the way within which that particular report was presented. That has not addressed some of my significant concerns. One of those related to a member of the public who presented. They were from Forrest Street. They said Hobbs was not the architect. It was then disclosed that in fact it was just the company of Hobbs rather than Hobbs himself who was the architect. Now that is not unlike me drafting a piece of opinion or an advice and then it being held up in future generations, I would hope, to suggest that this was done by the great Tim Howling, now dead. But the reality of it might be that it was drafted by a junior or somebody else with my firm and therefore not of any particular significance or relevance. So to the case of Forrest Street, it is hardly likely that if Hobbs had not drafted it, that it would thereby carry with it some degree of significance. I believe that what the gentleman came to speak to us about is fundamental and important to properly be considered as opposed to the background where it is expressed that Hobbs himself was in fact the architect, or at least the impression is left strongly that Hobbs himself was the architect as opposed to the firm. I can't support the inclusion of new buildings which are proposed to be built at Wesley College on the Heritage Register or as a heritage place. I can't support an old building which is 80s in St Columbus being caught up in heritage requirements, or for that matter, sections of the golf course themselves. It's simply, and I've stated this before and it's the reason why I'm brief tonight, it does not pass the pub test, it doesn't pass logic, and if it doesn't, and I've explained this in a very long and detailed explanation of about 15 pages in the October meeting, I think it was, if it doesn't, or November meeting, if it doesn't pass what is fundamental, that is why it's included on the Heritage Register because it holds something of significance, new buildings, 80s buildings and the golf course, the green itself and the like, or Forrest Street where Mr Hobbs wasn't the architect, doesn't pass the, in my view, pass the common sense pub test. So at least insofar as I would have liked to think that I was presenting the sensible view, I would have to accept that it's perhaps some people saying that I'm not presenting the sensible view because I'm not blindly following the person who was described as the independent expert adopting the places, the golf course, Forrest Street, Wesley College and St Columbus as areas containing any degree of significance justifying or warranting their inclusion on the Heritage Register, and for that reason I intend to vote against the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillors, would anyone like to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Question, Councillor Razon?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I have asked this question before, but nevertheless, just to double check, I just want to understand, is there any statutory or policy requirement that Category 1 and 2 properties that are included on the Heritage Survey are to be included on the Heritage List?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, there is no statutory requirement. However, the City will present any Category 1 or 2 places on the local Heritage Survey for Council to consider including in the Heritage List.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Councillor Raison.
Yes, I'll speak in favour of the officer recommendation. One of the hard things is when you ask for an umpire and you don't like the decision, what are you going to do about it? And I have some sympathy with what Councillor Howling's saying, particularly in relation to the Wesley property. I'm not a heritage expert though, and one of the things that is on my mind is that this is a very long process, and I would like there to be clarity and certainty for the community, and I appreciate the deputations that we've received. So this is the next step, and it's merely advertising the draft amended survey, and as I understand the answer that we've just received is that ultimately what goes onto the heritage list, which is where the planning teeth bite, so to speak, then that will be coming back to council at that point in time. So I'm in favour of the advertising. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raison. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to place on the record a number of reservations that I think are important. Firstly, noting that I do support heritage and recognising places of genuine cultural significance, and I also support ensuring that our history is appropriately acknowledged and protected. But what I do not support is a process where the scope of that protection is not clearly defined, or where the basis for identifying the significance is not sufficiently precise. Having reviewed both the city's assessment and the independent consultant's work, and I regularly review a lot of expert reports in my work, I am not entirely satisfied that the conclusions that have been reached are consistently grounded in a clear and objective methodology. In a number of instances, the statements of significance rely on quite broad and subjective concepts, references to societal value, aesthetic value, or contribution to the character of an area, without clearly articulating how those values translate into planning outcomes or what the practical implications will be for landowners and future development. And that creates a level of uncertainty that concerns me, because I do note that this item is described only for advertising only, but we do know that the local heritage survey does not sit in isolation, but it informs future decision making. It can influence how applications are assessed, what conditions are imposed, and in some cases whether a development is supported at all. So it's critical that what we're putting forward is robust, balanced, and capable of being applied consistently. And I'm also conscious that some of the changes, particularly at a precinct level, have the potential to extend the reach of heritage considerations well beyond the individual dwellings into broader areas that are the focus of future activation and investment. And this is where I think we do need to be particularly careful, because I do not think that heritage should become a blunt instrument or unintentionally constrain appropriate development or undermine the city's broader strategic objectives. There needs to be a clear line between recognising significance and restricting change. And at the moment, I'm not entirely confident that that line is sufficiently clear. So I do acknowledge that the purpose of advertising is to test these matters and allow the community and the property owners and other stakeholders to provide feedback on what is proposed. But ultimately, if this is to be adopted, it needs to strike the right balance between protecting what is genuinely significant and allowing the city to evolve in a way that is thoughtful, appropriate, and responsive to the needs of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against who hasn't already spoken? I'll say a few words. Councillors, I won't repeat the arguments made by Councillor Lees, Councillor Brenda Brandis and Councillor Raison. Suffice to say that I think they're correct. We resolved at the October 2025 Ordinary Council meeting to request the administration obtain place-specific reviews in respect of the 5 places specified in the officer report. The city subsequently engaged an independent heritage consultant who has undertaken those very same place-specific reviews in accordance with Council's resolution. Now, some of us might not like the results of those place-specific reviews, but the advice is the advice. I'm not prepared in this case to disregard the advice that this council specifically and expressly asked for. And I can't help but think that if we did, absent some really, really, really good reasons, it might understandably invite questions from our community about what we are basing our decisions on. So far, I haven't seen those really, really, really good reasons, although maybe other people feel differently. So that's all I've got to say. I'll be voting in favour of the officer recommendation. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who would like to speak? No? Oh, Councillor Prendeville? Oh, no? I thought your hand might have been going towards the microphone there, my bad. Okay, that takes us back. If there's no one else to speak, then Councillor Lees, you have 5 minutes to rebut any arguments made during debate, if you would like to do so.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and be brief. I want to stress again that this is now not the time to be debating whether a property should be formally listed or not. That's not the decision in front of us. Right now, we're simply looking at advertising an updated heritage survey based on expert advice. We've received expert advice twice now on this matter. We asked for the advice. I'm not a heritage expert. I don't believe any of us in this room are. I don't think it's appropriate to be suggesting that heritage advice was wanting without clear, justified reasoning, and it just does not seem appropriate to me. We've gone through this process with 2 experts now that have both confirmed the advice we have before us. So we're simply looking at updating a heritage survey. It doesn't have any statutory protections in it, so we're not talking about what may or may not occur in the future in terms of how this may impact development at this time. We are talking about a heritage survey, not a heritage list. As I noted before, there are a number of other houses on heritage in heritage surveys and heritage lists that have been designed by Hobbs. I keep forgetting the full name of the firm, but that firm, and not specifically designed by Hobbs. But I don't think it is for the owner to suggest that he doesn't believe it is and refute the expert advice. I think we need to look further down that track as part of this process. As I said before, the most sensible thing we can do at this point, in my view, is allow the process to, and perhaps unfold wasn't the right word to be using, proceed, so that we can draw a line in the sand. We've been gone back and forward on these places for some time now, and I think the council or the community want us to proceed. And everybody at that point through the advertising will get a further opportunity to make comments. So that would be my reasoning. I hope you would support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillors, I'm putting the officer recommendation to the vote. Please cast your votes. All right, the votes are in. Those who voted, it's a tie, 4-all. Those who voted in favour of the officer recommendation were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner and Councillor Raison. Those who voted against were Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Howling, Councillor Prendeville and Councillor Waugh. In this circumstance, where there's a deadlock on council and an absolute majority is not required, I have a casting vote. I cast that in favour of the officer recommendation. The officer recommendation has been carried. Okay. Could someone please retrieve Councillor Russell? Thank you. Thank you, Ms Guy, and welcome back, Councillor Russell. Councillors, we now turn to item 10.5.1, entitled Minutes of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting held on 10 March 2026. I have received an alternative motion from Councillor Howling. Has everyone got a hard copy of that alternative motion? Or an electronic copy? Okay, it's on the screen. All right. So I have received that alternative motion from Councillor Howling. I will ask Councillor Howling if it's identical to the one that was emailed to councillors on Friday night. Is that the case, Councillor Howling?
No, it's not.
Okay. All right. Governance, how is this different?
So we've just included back in the first two recommendations, which are consistent with the officer recommendation, but then we've separated out the item 6.5, the integrity framework, on Councillor Howling's advice. And then the third recommendation is from Councillor Howling to accept the completed self-assessment at item 6.5 of the audit risk and improvement minutes, and a further recommendation to request the Chief Executive Officer to undertake a comprehensive review of the integrity framework.
All right. I'm just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to read through what's on the screen so that everyone's on the same page. Literally. All right. Has everyone had an opportunity to get up to speed on that? I'm not seeing any no's. So, Councillor Howling, I will give you an opportunity to move your alternative motion first if you would like to do so. Would you like to do so?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. If you could, well, we've got it on the screen, but let's be consistent. If you'd like to read your revised alternative motion, and then I'll see about a seconder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The alternate motion is that Council receives the unconfirmed minutes of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee held on the 10th of March 2026 as contained in Attachment A, and adopts all the recommendations contained within the unconfirmed Audit Governance and Risk, Audit Risk and Improvement Committee minutes, except for item 6.5, Integrity Framework, or where a specific ARIC related matter is included as a separate report on this ordinary council meeting, in which case the council's determination on that report shall prevail. And 3, accepts the completed self-assessment at item 6.5, attachment D of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee minutes. And 4, requests the Chief Executive Officer to undertake a comprehensive review of the integrity framework inclusive of the completed self-assessment to develop concrete strategies that evaluate the city's integrity practices to embedded and excelling maturity levels, and present this revised framework to the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, and then Council for formal adoption.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Would anyone like to second Councillor Howling's alternative motion? Councillor Waugh. Councillor Howling, the floor is yours for your reasons.
Thank you. The minutes propose that we would simply note the integrity framework. The proposal by the officers had been recommend adoption by council. The integrity framework had been a review, as we were informed, at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, undertaken as a self-assessment process under the Auditor General guidelines for the way within which the organisation assesses its own governance practices. And there were a number of things that we as a council, being the leaders that we need to be, need to identify for the way within which the organisation as a whole is properly governed. Put simply, what this is doing is it's saying there has been identified some questions, some issues, some room for improvement. Now, every and any board that I've ever sat on, when it receives opportunity for room for improvement in its governance, welcomes the review, welcomes the opportunity, and welcomes the way within which that particular assessment, even if it's a self-assessment, is contributing to the well-being of the organisation. Now, this self-assessment was undertaken, as we found in the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee discussion that took place, and it was an intense discussion, was undertaken by the Chief Executive Officer who has been within local government and operating at the highest levels for 30 years. And the Chief Executive Officer, in undertaking that self-assessment, identified areas that were by no means poor, but certainly were identifying things that needed to be improved. As the leadership group, we have it as our responsibility not just to note a report of that significance or to bury a report of that significance, but to bring it to light and say, let's look for ways in which we can work with it. Let's look for ways in which we can ensure that the organisation holistically adopts good governance. Now, this can be crushed by poor governance. Numbers can be used, and the way within which it can be looked at, it can be 4-5 votes, as often matters are. That is not consistent with good governance, in my view. It needs to be proactively considered. Is there things that we can do? Is this self-assessment something that can help us as an organisation? If you think that we've got excellent governance within this organisation, as was recently circulated in an email, that doesn't require any of us to undertake some leadership to try to bring about better governance, then in reality, I think it would be fair to say that we're kidding ourselves. So what I'm trying to do is work with the self-assessment of a very well experienced, very well recognised CEO who has come very highly credentialed to this local government and has operated across various local governments, and when they come here, they identify some room for improvement. Now, I've had the benefit of working across quite a large number of local governments, and I can also see, having worked across a large number of local governments, that there's room for improvement. Not always is the areas that I identified as room for improvement welcomed. I think we've got to change our mindset. We don't want to just note. What we want to do is embrace when somebody says this is an area that we can improve on. We want to welcome it. We want to say this is consistent with what we want to do as a local government, and that is epitomise good governance consistent with the values of this local government. We want to provide the leadership within local government on those areas of good values, and we want to be able to support the Chief Executive Officer who has a role to deliver good governance and to assist and support each one of us to ensure that the organisation as a whole operates at the highest possible levels. There are things that we can do to improve, and I think here of the sorts of issues that were identified. Setting clear expectations from the top, that is, that it's reinforced exactly what we need to do. I've stated that in the report that I've got covering this particular motion, that the risk analysis and planning, that we identify risks, that we properly work out how to address them. Fraud and corruption detection systems are picked up and fixed up within the organisation to escalate.
That's 5 minutes, Councillor Howling. I'll move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Would someone be willing to second that motion? Councillor Prendeville, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that Councillor Howling be granted a further 5 minutes. Just waiting on one more vote. That was unanimous. Please proceed, Councillor Howling.
Thank you. I'm almost at the end, you're pleased to know. But it identifies the framework that we must identify and ensure that fraud and corruption systems and detection systems are improved across the organisation, not just training. I certainly raised that at the very first Audit, Governance and Improvement Committee, and I understand that that has now been implemented. Credit to the organisation. There's room for improvement. We've got to make sure that when there's monies being spent, that they are spent in an accountable way, that we've got method by which we can detect that everybody within the organisation is holding each other to account. That is the tension that exists within good governance. That's the tension that exists between us in the governance role and management, where we review each other. Now, reviewing each other is not just to pat each other on the back on every occasion, and hopefully there will be plenty of occasions on which that occurs. But reviewing each other is also saying, hey, this is where I think this improvement can be. So I thought that this was a report of significant value, a significant utility, and it also enables us to look at the culture of the organisation, which we are undertaking to some extent already because we're undertaking a review, that we respond, our response to integrity breaches, that those can be improved, that we can do better in that respect, and I think we can. So I see this as a great opportunity for the organisation to look for ways in which we can embrace improvement, and every organisation, and I've been on a number, and every local government that would receive a report such as this would welcome it. What you don't do, you don't bury bad news, you don't bury these sorts of things, you work with it to improve your organisation. And so I commend this motion to you, which asks the Chief Executive Officer to work with the self-assessment to identify ways in which we can improve it. And lastly, let me say this. This review, this self-assessment, just because it doesn't give us 90 or 100%, doesn't mean it's a bad review. Actually, 60 or 70% is pretty good. And I think that that's where I would say, even though it's not worked out on those percentages, it is. We've got a credit. That's what I would have marked ourselves as. Let's go for a higher distinction in university terms. That is, that we're excelling in good governance. I'm here because I want to see good governance. That's the only way within which we can make any decisions that listens to everybody, is fair, accountable and transparent. And that acronym I've used internationally, it's FAT, fair, accountable and transparent. And for that reason I commend to us this report and adopt and do something with it rather than just note it, tick it through, push it away and act as if it wasn't in existence.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillor Ward, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm supporting this alternate motion, and I want to note that there's no criticism whatsoever of the administration, and neither is it about assigning any blame to anybody. But for me, it's about council proactively taking steps to fulfil its governance role, particularly in circumstances where a framework as important as integrity has been assessed at still being at a developing level. That finding in itself, as Councillor Howling has said, is not a failure. In fact, in my view, I agree it is helpful. It gives us insight into where we currently sit and where improvement is needed. But what's important is how do we respond to the information that's given to us? So we could ignore it, note it and sweep it aside and carry on. But in my view, simply noting the integrity framework does not go far enough for us to discharge our duties, because integrity is not a peripheral issue. It is fundamental to public trust, organisational culture, and the way that decisions are made across the city. Where there is a clear indication that integrity is not yet fully embedded in the day-to-day operations, that is something that we need to actively engage with. So having said that, I want to acknowledge an important distinction. Our role, as we know, is strategic. We're not here to prescribe in detail how the administration should design or implement every element of a framework. That is properly the role of the Chief Executive Officer and the organisation. So my support for this motion is grounded in principle, not prescription. What we are doing is not dictating the how, but we're saying that the current position is not where it needs to be and that further work is required to ensure that integrity is not just documented, but genuinely embedded. In law, there's a phrase known as substance over form. That means a framework that is practical, usable, clearly understood across the organisation and supported by systems that ensure and enable accountability, not just compliance. So importantly, it means coming back to council with something that we can confidently adopt, knowing that it reflects a mature and effective approach to integrity. So this is about setting expectations at a strategic level and asking for improvement where improvement has already been identified as necessary. Ultimately, our responsibility is to our community to ensure that the systems underpinning this organisation are strong, transparent and capable of maintaining public confidence. And for those reasons, I'm supporting this motion and I encourage my fellow councillors to also support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against the alternative motion? I will. Sorry, I just saw you. Would you like to go first? No? Okay. All right. I'll start by saying that I've prepared my notes based on the version of Councillor Howling's alternative motion that was distributed to councillors on Friday night. There have been some changes. I'm seeing those changes for the first time here in the chamber. If my notes refer to what was there on Friday night and not what's on there right now, I apologise in advance. But I do have some concerns with this motion. And before I set out what those concerns are, I think it's important for us to go over the relevant background and particularly what was discussed at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting on the 10th of March. At that meeting, the officer recommendation was to note the City of South Perth Integrity Framework in what was then Attachment C and recommend adoption by Council. That was the recommendation from the administration to the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. And at the time, the relevant attachment contained both the revised City of South Perth Integrity Framework, which the officer recommendation here is asking us to adopt, but it also had a completed Integrity Framework Maturity Self-Assessment that had been completed by CEO Liz Ledger. Now, at that committee meeting, committee members raised questions about the completed Integrity Framework Maturity Self-Assessment. And Ms Ledger informed the committee that she alone undertook that assessment and that she had not liaised with executive and staff. There was no evidence provided or cited to support the ratings allocated by Ms Ledger in the Integrity Framework Maturity Self-Assessment. At the committee meeting, the committee members noted the subjectivity of self-assessments, particularly in the absence of evidence, and the committee ultimately simply noted the integrity framework and declined to make a recommendation to Council. The integrity framework was not endorsed by the committee, but my recollection is that this was because the committee was not prepared to endorse the completed integrity framework maturity self-assessment in the absence of supporting evidence. And councillors, that wasn't an unreasonable position for the committee to take. Why do I say that? The Integrity Framework Maturity Self-Assessment tool was developed by the Public Sector Commission to assist government authorities to improve their management of integrity. It was last updated in January 2025. The Public Sector Commission actually provides a fair bit of guidance on how we should use the self-assessment tool, and this information is available publicly on the state government's website. Councillor Howling has argued that we should embrace the self-assessment completed by CEO Liz Ledger, but the Public Sector Commission recommends that the following should occur when using the self-assessment tool. The person or functional area responsible for integrity and/or governance should coordinate the assessment with relevant internal stakeholders. The coordinator should identify individuals who can comment on each element and plan how different views are to be managed and consensus reached. Each element should be assessed based on maturity levels, their indicators and characteristics. Evidence should be gathered to support the characteristics that are in place. And evidence should be documented to support the assessment and the reasons for choosing the maturity level to ensure that there is rigour in the process. Now, councillors, I don't know whether or not the ratings in the self-assessment tool completed by Ms Ledger are all correct or not. I just don't know. But there was no evidence provided to the committee that the completed self-assessment tool had been prepared in accordance with the process recommended by the Public Sector Commission. The discussion during the committee meeting on the 10th of March indicated that at least some of the Public Sector Commission's guidance had not been followed. And I'm not saying that as a criticism of anyone, but I do say that the committee was correct not to endorse that completed self-assessment tool. So the officer recommendation, which I'm foreshadowing by the way, for this item proposes that the uncompleted self-assessment tool should be used by the city going forwards, and I do agree with that. But the person undertaking the self-assessment should use the self-assessment tool using the guidance set out by the Public Sector Commission. And that brings me to this alternative motion. To me, one of the problems with Councillor Howling's alternative motion is that it doesn't adopt the revised integrity framework at all. That's 5 minutes. I need to interrupt myself. Would someone be kind enough to move a motion that I be granted a further 5 minutes? Councillor Brenda Abrandis and seconded by Councillor Lees. Thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. Just waiting on one more vote. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. I'll try not to use all of it. So that first reason is, well, the city should have an integrity framework, even if the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee was not prepared to endorse the self-assessment tool completed by CEO Liz Ledger. Councillor Howling's reasons seem to accept the ratings of the self-assessment tool completed by Ms Ledger verbatim, but even on that logic, that's no reason not to adopt the revised integrity framework. We do have an integrity framework right now. It was prepared in January 2020, and if council were to pass Councillor Howling's alternative motion, the 2020 integrity framework would remain in place. Okay, but I haven't heard a single argument as to why the January 2022 integrity framework is preferable to the revised integrity framework proposed by the officer recommendation. As far as I can tell, the arguments so far have been silent on that issue. But the main problem, at least for me, with Councillor Howling's alternative motion is that Councillor Howling wants us to accept the self-assessment conducted by Ms Ledger, despite the fact that neither this committee nor this council has ever received any evidence in support of those ratings. Now, they could be correct. I don't know, but they should be backed by evidence that would have allowed the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee and would have allowed this council to be satisfied as to the accuracy of those ratings. The Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, which by the way has 2 independent expert panel members who are specifically engaged by the city to guide and inform us, were not prepared to endorse those ratings, and neither should we, at least not until we're satisfied that the self-assessment tool was completed in accordance with the guidance set out by the Public Sector Commission and that we have been provided with the appropriate evidence. That brings me to the final point in what was Councillor Howling's motion, at least on Friday night, which was directing the CEO to undertake a comprehensive review of the integrity framework to develop concrete strategies that elevate the city's integrity practices to embedded and excelling maturity levels and present this revised framework to Council for formal adoption. Councillors, I'm all for improvement where appropriate of our processes. That's a good thing. We certainly shouldn't shy away from that. But the flaw with this, one of the flaws with this alternative motion, is that it implicitly assumes that the self-assessment tool completed by Ms Ledger was correct. Again, despite the fact that it doesn't seem to have followed the recommended process by the Public Sector Commission, and we haven't received any evidence and support. It would be far better if the city were to first undertake a new self-assessment in line with the guidance provided by the Public Sector Commission to determine what the city's ratings actually are, because only then can we make an informed decision about what should be done about the city's integrity practices. So, to sum up, this alternative motion is, I think, with the greatest of respect, just a little bit misconceived, and I think it's fundamentally based on assertions and assumptions that are not supported by evidence. I will be voting against this alternative motion, and I am foreshadowing the officer recommendation. That's me. Would someone else like to speak in favour of the alternative motion? Councillor Prendeville.
I just have a question, if I may, Mr Mayor.
By all means.
Well, maybe 2 or 3 questions. Is the self-assessment that's being discussed, is it an arduous and lengthy process to complete?
Ms Amprema? Or Ms Catalini, sorry, I should have asked. Ms Amprema.
There is a little bit of work involved, but with the right staff involved in the process, then it's something that will be reasonable to do.
Thank you, through the chair. The meeting that was held on the 10th of March, hearing the discussions, the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee obviously felt a certain way about the self-assessment that was done. Was there a request not to redo this including the other directors, or is there a plan to redo this, seeing as it didn't quite meet the standard of the committee?
Ms Amprema or Mr Hindle?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, that's what the city's advice would be, to adopt the integrity framework in the first instance with a blank self-assessment, which would establish the framework as the foundational starting point. Once in place, the self-assessment would then be completed on an annual basis with associated commentary and progress through the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee before coming to Council. So that would be the plan.
Okay. Just lastly, does the current administration, acting CEO or other directors have any serious concerns with the points on Councillor Howling's alternative motion?
Ms Amprema, should I send that to you?
Have had limited time to consider it. But I think potentially the question I would have is around whether excelling is the appropriate level of maturity and what would be required to get to that level of maturity for the city. So at this stage, I'm not quite sure what the city would need to do to achieve that level. So that would probably be my only comment. You know, it's really up to council. We'd need to come back and just once we've undertaken that assessment as to what would be required to get there.
Thank you, Ms Amprema.
Thank you.
Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's alternative motion? Is there anyone else who would like to speak against? Councillor Raison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When I ran for council, I put out a letter to the community, and in that I said that there were a number of things the community had raised with me, and that there were only 4 things that were personally important to me. Good governance was one of those 4 things. So this is a very important subject to me. I won't be voting in favour of this alternate motion because for me, paragraph 3, the acceptance of the self-assessment, is in a way us putting the cart before the horse. Part of governance is about processes, and for me, as a member of the Audit and Risk Committee, the process is that a framework would be considered, just bearing in mind that this self-assessment tool is part of that framework. So the framework, including the blank self-assessment tool, would come to us, and we would then, then the process would go from there. But for whatever reason, it hasn't happened in that way. So is that enough to just say we shouldn't do anything with this particular self-assessment? I found myself in a unique position on the Audit and Risk Committee because not only did I vote against recommending the framework, I even voted against noting the framework, which seems strange for somebody who has good governance as a priority. So it's probably worth me explaining what my reasons were. So what is this integrity framework? It outlines the policies, mechanisms and responsibilities that help us, the city, deliver on the strategic community plan. And they're the key words for me, that help us deliver on the strategic community plan. So when I considered this at Audit and Risk, even though I would have been very happy to go with the majority view, where I got to is that we are in the midst of a major review of that strategic plan. So thinking from a strategic coherence point of view, I felt that the most efficient thing that we could do in terms of using our resources and ratepayers' money would be to wait until we review the strategic community plan, bearing in mind we do already have an integrity framework in place, accepting, of course, that it is timely and it does need to be updated. Is it wise and the best use of our time and the administration's time to do that now? So my personal feeling was that it was no, and then the other layer to my decision was that we have the monitor in place. And I would imagine, given some of the issues that are raised in the scope of the monitor's work, that there may well be things that feed into that integrity framework or the strategic community plan. It's very likely to me that there will be additional governance matters that are raised and included as part of the major strategic review. So in the meeting, I voted against it in both cases in the hope that we actually could get an even better outcome. So it wasn't anything to do with burying this at Audit and Risk, it was quite the opposite. My objective at the time was to say, hey, everybody, there is an opportunity not to waste time in doing this once and then doing it again in a couple of months' time when we have done our strategic community plan and we've got the monitor's report. So I think it would be incongruent for me, in light of those reasons that I gave at Audit and Risk, to now accept the self-assessment, even though I accept that it was done with good intent at the time.
Thank you, Councillor Raison. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the Councillor Howling's alternative motion? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak against? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Really, I'm not going to be changing my vote from the committee vote that I had, so I'll be rejecting point number 3. I would just like to add, and this is really for the public's benefit, is that I don't believe it's the committee's or the council's intent to bury this self-assessment report. For the community's benefit, those minutes, the report results are actually provided in the March agenda as a separate attachment in the March Audit, Risk and Governance or Improvement Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against who hasn't spoken yet? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, and if you can let us know if you're speaking for or against.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking against this motion. Again, my notes have been prepared based on the original motion put before us on Friday evening, and I've only seen this amended version now, but in considering my notes, they reflect pretty much what is in this amended motion. So I don't support this motion for quite a few reasons. Firstly, the recommendation rejects the city's proposed internal framework, and that framework is incredibly important, and we should be moving ahead with it. The framework provides clear expectations, roles and responsibilities, values, standards, leadership commitment, organisational cultural aspiration. It provides accountability for the organisation, internal controls, audit, governance, fraud and corruption detection systems, self-review and response to integrity breaches. It is very important that we do actually adopt the proposed framework. At the March Audit Risk and Improvements Committee, the CEO explained how she had undertaken the assessment process. And I understand that that had limited scope with regard to engagement of the executives. As the Mayor has indicated, the requirement to utilise the executive staff and also staff who are responsible for the different functions is highly appropriate and would have supported the self-assessment process. Based on the approach that was undertaken for the self-assessment review, I would be concerned that the broad assessment identifying a significant number of processes as developing may not necessarily be correct. An informed decision with regard to the subject matter experts might have actually assisted with a different outcome. I would like the review to be undertaken based on evidence, and again, that was something that was required to be performed. It's important that when we make a decision, that it's based on merit, and part of that process is evidence provided with a self-review process. I am sort of conflicted as well with regard to the significant number of categories that are considered developing in context to the corporate projects and the activities where we've also got internal reviews that have been undertaken which actually consider that we're actually in a better position. I'm also aware that under previous CEOs, a significant amount of work was undertaken with regard to integrity in the city. That included addressing things such as values, behaviours, integrity processes, and I understand there are actually quite a lot of processes that are currently in place. So for them to be developing as opposed to processes that are actually embedded, I'm sure we're actually in a better place. We have two independent external members on the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, and they are there for a reason. They are there to provide good governance and to ensure that we have better decision making. This process shouldn't circumvent the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee and also the independent committee members to which they've been recruited. Again, if this was to be referred in any way back for further consideration, the due process that should be undertaken, which would provide good governance, would be back to the Audit Risk and Improvements Committee. I'm also concerned with regard to the comment that includes integrity practices to an embedded and excelling maturity level. Listening to Acting CEO and Primo this evening, concerns around whether excelling as an appropriate maturity level raises some concern. So again, you know, based on the administration undertaking this review thoroughly and considering where we should be at, would be the appropriate stance to take.
Councillor Brenda Brandis, that's 5 minutes, but I'll move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes to speak. Would someone be kind enough to second that motion? Councillor De Souza, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on our motion that Councillor Brenda Brandis be granted a further 5 minutes. And that was unanimous. Please continue, Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, fellow councillors. Thank you, Mr Mayor. The justification that's been provided with regard to this motion is good theory and it is appropriate. But it's theory that isn't taking into account evidence in completing a self-assessment process. So I'm rejecting this motion before us tonight on the basis that it doesn't adopt an integrity framework, that it doesn't take into consideration that the process for completing the self-assessment could have been done with the support of the executive and subject matter experts in further detail, and that if there was a requirement for this to be reconsidered, that it should actually be provided back to the Audit Risk Committee and Improvements Committee as a process, as that is what the committee is there for and should not be a matter for the ordinary council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against Councillor Howling's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? No. Councillor Howling, you have 5 minutes to rebut any arguments made during debate, if you would like to do so. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I can't leave unchallenged the suggestion that the motion seems misconceived. With the greatest of respect, the tool itself, firstly, refers to the fact that it is a self-assessment process, maturity self-assessment tool. If the name self-assessment doesn't speak volumes, then I'm surprised. Further, the tool explains on the website to which the Mayor has referred, but has not referred to this statement, it states, in small authorities, and the local government would be one of those, a member of the leadership group may conduct the assessment. It does not go on to say that that is required to be undertaken in consultation with any of the other staff. Neither was it suggested at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee that the assessment had not been undertaken with any evidence as now is being suggested in the council. That simply wasn't suggested. It wasn't stated, it wasn't asked, and there is no basis to say that it was done without evidence. Somebody who undertakes 30 years within a local government may very well have the expertise, believe it or not, of a similar nature to which the Heritage Survey moments ago was said to be readily accepted because it was an expert's report and we can't go against it. When I raised the guidelines that it failed to adopt, nobody really had regard to it. But what is stated in this document that is on the website, that the maturity levels may require some degree of documentation. And you can go through and have a look at the various documents that are in the website or held by the local government to help you come to the view expressed. It is misconceived to suggest that the report was required to be undertaken by involving everybody within the local government itself at a senior level. That's not what is stated. What is stated is that we have a senior member of the leadership team undertaking a self-assessment and that they do so and review the evidence, and they're able to do so in various ways. One of those could very well be staff surveys or a focus group if necessary. To what? To assess and determine the maturity level that is necessary. Not whether there's a problem, but the maturity level. So when I say that this is being buried, it's because if we do nothing with it, we are burying it. If we just allow it to sit and say, oh, well, that was somebody's view, not supported by the evidence, which was never put to the CEO when she was asked questions at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. And, well, we'll disregard the fact that the Public Sector Management Act required this to be undertaken and arguably required it to be undertaken previously. It doesn't need a motion to be passed by this council in order for the CEO to undertake the required role. Required how? By the Public Sector Management Act. It doesn't need it. In fact, it ought not to be the case. The CEO was not only fully within her rights to undertake it, it's misconceived to suggest that it was done without evidence, because that's not the fact. It's misconceived to suggest that it's a statement which is done in a way within which it is somehow tendentious, presenting a perspective of the organisation that's not quite right. One can easily and quickly, if you do your job, reading the minutes and reading the agendas, come to a view as to where the organisation sits as a whole. I'm arguing for adopting this.
60 seconds, Councillor Howling.
And not waiting, because we will not get a report from the Monitor, with the greatest of respect, and neither should we. We will be told some of the things that have been observed, and that's great. But that is not going to be the panacea to identify how we can improve our governance. This is the answer. Act on it, not just note it, rather put it to the Chief Executive Officer and ask it to be in the overall toolkit that she has available to her to improve the organisation as a whole. If you reject this, in essence, I say that you reject good governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Howling's alternative motion to the vote. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, I've foreshadowed the officer recommendation. So with that, councillors, please cast your votes on Councillor Howling's alternative motion. And the votes are in, and Councillor Howling's alternative motion has failed 3 votes to 6. Those who voted in favour were Councillor Sousa, Councillor Howling and Councillor Waugh. Those who voted against were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Raison and Councillor Russell. The motion has failed. Therefore, as foreshadowed, I will move the officer recommendation. Would someone second the officer recommendation? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. I'll go to there now. Ordinarily, I'd speak first and Councillor Brenda Abrandis would speak second, but happy to accommodate the question now.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is whether it's possible to consider the paragraphs separately. And I'm not sure, apologies if it's not the right time to ask the question. I thought maybe I should raise it beforehand.
That's all right. Ms Anne Primo, should I send that to you? Or Ms Catalini?
If council wishes, they could vote on each part separately.
All right. I've moved the officer recommendation in its entirety, but I guess I'll ask Councillor Raison why we might vote on each individually.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity. I guess in my mind, ordinarily, if we were going to confirm minutes, even though I understand these are unconfirmed minutes, that would be a discrete item. I think linking that in, I imagine items 1 and 2 probably flow from one another, that if we're going to receive the minutes and then we adopt the recommendations. But item 3, as that was not the recommendation of the Audit and Risk Committee, in my view, that should be considered separately.
I have no difficulty with doing that if Councillor Brenda Abrandis is happy with that.
No, I'm fine with that, Mr Mayor.
All right. So, folks, the way that we'll proceed is we'll have the debate as usual. I will speak to the officer recommendation and Councillor Brenda Abrandis will speak as seconder. Councillors will be given the opportunity to speak either for or against or ask questions. But when we get to the vote, I'll put each paragraph to the vote separately. Governance, I'll just check that that's okay.
Was it 1 and 2 together? And then
yeah, actually on
separate?
reflection, that's probably the way to go, isn't it? Because 2 flows from 1, doesn't it? Yes, all right. So forget what I just said. What we'll do is we'll go through debate in the ordinary way until we get to the vote, and then I will move paragraphs 1 and 2 together but paragraph 3 will be moved separately. Is that what accommodating what you were getting at, Councillor Raison?
Thank you, yes.
All right, okay. Councillors, I haven't got a lot to say that I haven't said already. I think we should receive the unconfirmed minutes, and that's a necessary, I think, prerequisite for passing paragraph 2. I think we should adopt the revised integrity framework that is proposed by this motion. Just in case anyone's a bit uncertain, the integrity framework at attachment B that has come to this meeting differs from the one that came to the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting on the 10th of March, in the sense that the original revised integrity framework presented to Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee on the final page 17, I think from memory, said that the completed self-assessment tool, which was annexed to the revised integrity framework, formed part of the revised integrity framework, and to accept one was to accept the other. So in effect, if we had accepted that one that was put before Audit, Risk and Improvement, we would have also been accepting the completed self-assessment tool prepared by Ms. Ledger. Whereas the one that's in front of us now has almost exactly the same integrity framework, save for page 17, where it refers to a blank self-assessment tool template and says words to the effect that this is the template that the city will use going forwards to self-assess our integrity framework and our integrity processes. I'll just make sure with governance that I have understood that correctly.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. So that's what I think we should do. Just to comment briefly on something that was said during the debate on the alternative motion, I'm pretty certain that the question about whether there was evidence supporting the completed self-assessment tool was raised and was discussed. And I've got a pretty good memory of one of the external expert members of the committee, Ms. Shona Zollsdorf, saying words to the effect of this is a committee of evidence as justification for why she was voting the way that she was voting. So I don't necessarily agree with the characterisation that Councillor Howling put previously. I guess we can go to the tape later on if it's really important, but that is my memory of what took place at the committee meeting. Nothing further to say. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this motion as it stands. Again, very important that we adopt the integrity framework, and I am supportive of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, would anyone like to speak against the officer recommendation? No? Does anyone else wish to speak in favour? No. There being no debate, I'll simply put the items to the vote. As promised, the first vote will be on paragraphs 1 and 2 of the officer recommendation. Then we'll have a separate vote on paragraph 3. But for the time being, councillors, please cast your vote on paragraphs 1 and 2 of the officer recommendation. And we're just waiting on 2 more votes. And 1 more vote now. That was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. And now I'm putting paragraph 3 of the officer recommendation to the vote. Councillors, please cast your votes. And the votes are in. The paragraph 3 was carried 8 votes to 1. Those in favour were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Howling, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Russell and Councillor Wall. Those against were Councillor Raison. Okay, that concludes item 10.5.1. We now move on to item 10.5.2. That is entitled Risk Management Quarterly Report. We have got a committee recommendation, but we also have an alternative motion from Councillor Howling Councillor Howling, would you like to move your alternative motion first?
Yes, with a minor amendment, there's no Risk West report, but there was the Risk West workshop that had been carried out. So insofar as it refers to a report, it should be amended to be the Risk West workshop. So the outcomes of the Risk West workshop. So with that amendment, it'll be that Council adopts the strategic risk review developed by the Risk West workshops and sets aside the recommendation to effectively set aside the risk management quarterly report at item 6.6 of the audit risk and improvement minutes, and direct the Chief Executive Officer to apply to propose, or rather it should be direct the Chief Executive Officer to propose to Council recommendations arising from governance as contained in the Risk West strategic workshop, and requests the Chief Executive Officer to utilise the findings of the Risk West workshop to identify areas of the city's governance framework that require improvement and to report back to Council with actionable strategies to address governance and risk gaps.
All right, thank you, Councillor Howling. Is there anyone who would like to second Councillor Howling's amended alternative motion? Going, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Howling, the floor is yours.
Thank you. There was a workshop that was undertaken. It was undertaken by Risk West. The Audit Risk and Improvement Committee sought not to effectively adopt and utilise that. It is a workshop that we have undertaken, and it's a process by which we can usefully identify good governance. The workshop and the outcomes were to be reported back to Council. We were informed of that during and after that report to continue to develop good governance. Since that workshop, there's been no further work that's been undertaken within the Council to identify those matters of good governance and how to properly approach the adoption of good governance during the period of the last 2 months at the very least, and perhaps a little longer than that. It's my view that the workshop provides at least some what might be considered to be self-assessment. That is a review amongst ourselves of those issues that were front of mind when it comes to risk and when it comes to good governance. Good governance looks at risk gaps. It identifies those things which collectively the organisation considers to be important by way of a self-assessment, and then it looks for ways within which it can be proactive about improving good governance. It's all about identifying risks, working together to work out how we can improve and do what is necessary to improve. Of course, I'm disappointed about the previous motion, but it should not come as a surprise that I want to ensure that good governance is adopted and adopted as quickly as we possibly can. To kick the can down the road and to expect that at some euphoric moment in the future we will have a further opportunity to do something which is so much better than what we may have done in the past is, in my view, utopia that simply doesn't exist. We've got an opportunity to build on that which has been undertaken. Many councillors came to that workshop and engaged, and it was well led by a well-respected expert in the area of risk. And for that reason, it's my view that we need to work with that workshop outcomes and work out how we can improve, work out our governance frameworks, as well as identify the risk gaps to move forward to implement better governance within this local government, because we need it.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillor Waugh, anything to say, seconder?
Can I reserve and potentially speak later?
I'll allow it, but it's not a practice that I want this council getting into. I'll allow it this time, but going forwards, if you're a mover and a seconder, I expect you to speak at the usual time. So, is there anyone who would like to speak against Councillor Howling's alternative motion? I'll ask a question to begin with. Ms Ampremo, I'm aware that neither council nor administration has seen or received a strategic risk report developed by RiskWest. Has the administration or council received a strategic risk review developed from the RiskWest workshop that would be capable of adoption by council? Because I'm not aware of it, one.
RiskWest did provide back to the city an updated risk register based on the discussions from the workshop.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to speak against this, councillors. Once again, I've prepared my speaking notes based on the motion that was circulated on Friday night, which talked about a strategic risk report, which as far as I know doesn't actually exist. But now we're looking to potentially adopt a strategic risk review developed by the RiskWest workshop, which I haven't seen, and I don't know if anyone else has seen as well. Councillors, I'm concerned that this alternative motion is disregarding the clear and almost unanimous recommendation of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. The committee recommendation was carried by 6 votes to 1. Those 6 votes included the 2 independent and external panel members who are engaged by the city because of their relevant skill sets. So I'm foreshadowing the committee and officer recommendation if this alternative motion isn't successful. Once again, I think it's important to go over the relevant background and what was actually discussed at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting on 10 March 2026. This alternative motion wants us to accept the strategic risk review developed by the RiskWest workshop. But that wasn't even the officer recommendation at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting. The officer recommendation merely asked the committee to note the details, open quote, the details of the activities contained in the body of the report, close quote. The relevant workshop on the 23rd of February 2026 was only attended by 5 out of 9 councillors. Almost half the council was unable to participate in that single workshop. I don't see how council can possibly adopt something that it hasn't actually seen. I don't understand why we're even considering adopting a strategic risk review that, as far as I'm aware, hasn't actually been considered by councillors at a workshop, and I don't know what it actually says. The proposed strategic risk report developed by RiskWest was discussed at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting on the 10th of March. As I understand it, that proposed report was intended to be a compilation of strategic risks identified by the external facilitator and the risks identified by the attendees for each risk item. But relevantly, as far as I'm aware, the facilitator wasn't undertaking any analysis. The facilitator identified a range of strategic risks drawn from the Global Risks Report 2026 published by the World Economic Forum. Those risks, as I understand it, were predetermined and were not subject to discussion or review. There were a number of concerns about the workshop expressed at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. Some of those are summarised on page 73 of the agenda papers, but I'll list a few of them. The term risk was not defined based on the ISO 31000 risk management. Risks were not linked to the strategic community plan as proposed in the ISO 31000. There were no linkages between causes, risks and consequences to assist in determining risk ratings and identifying the relevant controls. Attendees were asked to identify the risks for each risk without defining what that actually is. And attendees were asked to input the risks of a risk into an app with no discussion by attendees or input from the executive. And perhaps even more relevantly, some of the statements input into the app were factually incorrect. Now, New councillors might be unaware of historical information that does not support the statements put into the app by certain attendees at the workshop. And for example, statements were made in relation to the historical financial performance of the City of South Perth that are absolutely not supported by the historical evidence. I'm referring, among other things, to a paper referred to at paragraph 2 of the officer recommendation, being a paper tabled under item 7.6 at the June 2025 Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting and entitled Response to Notice of Motion be tabled at the June ARIC meeting. Those same statements made by an individual attending the workshop, I understand the feedback was provided anonymously, is also not supported by the audited financial statements or by the exit reports by the Office of the Auditor General. I'm almost out of time, so I'll simply say, I think it might be high risk to have a report tabled at ARIC and at Council that includes commentary that challenged the veracity of the OAG endorsed reports without really strong evidence for doing that. That's me. Is there anyone else, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's alternative motion? No? Is there anyone else who would like to speak against? Councillor Raison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking against this alternate notice of motion as somebody on the Audit and Risk Committee who also did attend the workshop. Just by way of background for others, because I know that only just over 5 of us were able to attend that workshop, is that in my mind, as someone who sat on that committee, that workshop was intended to address 2 things. One was a concern that was raised by Audit and Risk that as a new council, we did not really have a shared understanding of even what strategic risk meant. So not the last meeting, the meeting before, that was raised is that the starting point would be for us all to actually attend a workshop and have a shared understanding about strategic risk, which sounds very straightforward, but given that we've got this on the agenda now, clearly, you know, it's not. I don't think that that was addressed as fulsomely as what was intended, what the committee had in mind, but the other thing I think that was of significant concern was that there was no opportunity for councillors or the independent experts to actually raise strategic risks, where we need to sit down at some point and actually generate strategic risks ourselves based on our experience. That's not to discount that we can, sit back and give our opinion on global risks, but I think that there wasn't any opportunity. So they were the couple of things I think by way of background. And one thing I would say going forward, just to make this a more efficient process so we don't find ourselves here again, is that I suggest that the scope is actually put to members of the Audit and Risk Committee. It can be done outside a committee, so we actually understand that what we're aiming to achieve is going to be achieved by the workshop. And I agree with the comment that was made in relation to at the time of the workshop. I personally did have quality. So what I'm talking about previously was quantitative questions about not being able to raise strategic risks, but I at the time also raised qualitative questions because it struck me as soon as we started giving our own inputs that there was not I had issues with the qualitative way that the data was being gathered. So if we are going to gather data in that way, I think we do need to be satisfied by how that data is going to be put together. And I haven't seen what information was generated from the workshop. And I also am hopeful that we actually, all 9 of us, can sit together, because I think this is absolutely critical to our role, as Councillor Howling has identified. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raison. Councillors, would anyone like to speak in favour of Councillor Howling's alternative motion? No? Would anyone else like to speak against? Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just be very brief. The motion suggests that we adopt the strategic risk review developed by the Risk West workshop. I don't have visibility of that, so I wouldn't be comfortable adopting something that I haven't seen. I haven't seen the findings or outcomes from the workshop, but my recollection of the purpose of the workshop was consistent with Councillor Raison's. I didn't realise that we were going to be there identifying future risks. So I thought it was a bit more to give us an understanding of the process and the governance behind risk workshops. Risk. And I would also reiterate that there were only 5 of us in attendance that night. And the Mentimeter, I think is what it was called, the app that we used, allowed us to make anonymous individual comments, and there was no discussion or agreement on those comments made, so I don't feel comfortable them being used as the basis for change to the risk register at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against Councillor Howling's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken?
Question.
Far away.
I'm addressing this to the acting CEO. The Mayor in his presentation spoke about feedback, the feedback of the Risk West workshop, and referred to specific items. Have you received the feedback from the workshop?
Ms Amprema?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the feedback, I think, is referring to the updated risk register, and we received a printout of the Mentimeter information as well that Council would have seen on the night, or those present would have seen on the night.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. Councillor
Sorry.
Howling, another question?
I just missed that last word.
So the Mentimeter information that would have come up on the screen during the workshop, we have a printout of that information as well.
Yes, my question is, has that been provided to Council?
No, I don't believe it has.
And the feedback that the Mayor is speaking about, how has that been provided only to the Mayor?
I thought I was referring to the feedback that went up on the Menti app, but I wasn't at that workshop, so that's only my understanding. But Ms Amprema?
I'm not aware of that information having been provided to the Mayor, no.
And are you aware of anybody suggesting the Auditor General's report of 2019 was inaccurate, or any basis to criticise the previous financial records of the city through any of that feedback?
Councillor Howling, I'm disallowing that question because that's not what I said when I spoke. Do you have any other questions?
Yes. I'll try to rephrase it. There's a suggestion that there was the Auditor General's report that was received, or that persons were not aware of the Auditor General's report of 2019, and it would be going down a dangerous road to then effectively criticise that. Are you aware of any criticisms in respect?
Councillor Howling, I'm disallowing that as well because I fear you're chasing a red herring. I'll read you exactly what I said a moment ago. Those same statements made by, sorry, I'll start at the start. New councillors may be unaware of historical information that does not support the statements input into the app by certain attendees at the workshop. For example, statements were made in relation to the historical financial performance of the City of South Perth that are not supported. I made reference to the paper at paragraph 2, item 7.6, response to the notice of motion to be tabled at the June ARIC meeting. I've continued those. Yes, Councillor Howling, but you're doing it on issues that aren't relevant and are setting up a straw man and a red herring.
I don't agree. Can I ask the Chief Executive Officer?
You're not the presiding member, Councillor Howling. I've disallowed that question. Please proceed with a different question.
Could I ask, were there statements made critical of the 2019 Auditor General's report?
Ms Amprema?
Sorry, where are you asking, were those statements made?
Yes, the Mayor just referred to and stated that there were statements that were made that were critical of the historical financial circumstances, words to that effect. I haven't recorded it with absolute precision. Now, are you aware of statements such as the Mayor has described?
I'm not aware of those statements that have been referred to.
Any further questions, Councillor Howling? All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against the Councillor Howling's alternative motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it fairly succinct. I'm speaking against this alternative motion for a few reasons. An alternative motion was passed, which actually supported the holding of another strategic risk workshop, and that this should actually include all councillors. The workshop that was undertaken, as advised tonight, was approximately half the councillors, and that is not an effective risk management workshop. I'm concerned about the process that was undertaken, the fact that there were predetermined risks that we had to accept and had to annotate against. And when the risks were provided and the requests for comments or attributes against those risks were made, they were accepted and there wasn't any challenge. I was also concerned that the input from the administration should be an important part of understanding some of these risks, but it was a very one-sided process. I think for good governance, we do need more of the elected members to actually participate in risk management workshops, and we do need to have a process that does facilitate better assessment of the risks and also determination of those risks and not be predetermined. For these reasons, I will not be accepting this alternative motion tonight. And again, we don't have an assessment available to us from RiskWest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against Councillor Howling's alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? No. Councillor Howling, you have 5 minutes to rebut any arguments made during debate, if you would like to do so.
Thank you. Can I say that at the beginning of the risk workshop, risk was discussed in detail and adopted. Secondly, risk and governance issues are very difficult and sometimes slip through your fingers to identify. It's a little bit like symptoms. You have to be very proactive. If you get too much of one thing, you may go wrong. Sometimes the symptoms don't show themselves immediately, they show themselves down the track for failure to have adopted the necessary standard. Imagine you eat a whole bag of licorice. You don't eat it in moderation. The symptoms will become known to you very quickly once you do so. You have to be proactive. You have to avoid that. You have to ensure that you are looking for the things that are going to give you the gutsache. And you can't do that with precision. You can't do that to say, this is it. Now, the Monitor, no doubt, is listening carefully and will shortly complete a report, and there'll be 100 reasons why we'll all reject it. Because I know that when you get to governance, you're dealing with the symptoms. You're trying to work out, how do we fix up the symptoms? Now, if you've eaten a whole bag of licorice, you can eat a few charcoal tablets, and it might help you along the journey for a little bit, but it could have the reverse consequences. And so too in our circumstances. The feedback which was being monitored by all of us and being seen on the screen put up was there for everybody to see. There wasn't statements critical of the financial history from an uninformed group of new councillors that had just arrived and knew nothing about it, and heaven forbid we would be all criticising ourselves if that was the case. Again, the sensitivity about this is over the top. We've got to look at ourselves. We've got to say, how can we improve? And that means it's impressionistic. We self-diagnose. We say this is because this symptom is because of eating too much licorice and I'm going to have some charcoal and hopefully it'll fix it. And there is charcoal that we've got to be able to eat. It might not taste very nice, but we've got to be prepared to do it because there's 1,000 reasons why we will reject every single report, whether it's a report by the Chief Executive Officer, because it didn't rely sufficiently on governance, whether it's a report from this council itself, from the impressions that we all have about governance. Because after all, we're new, or some councils are new, or Some people didn't define risk with precision according to precisely what's contained in the regulations. It was a useful exercise. It was an exercise that feeds into the overall framework of how to improve governance. There is no reason for why we say, well, this is not the precise method by which we've identified precisely what it is. I can assure you, there is no precise index, no precise toolkit, and no precise way within which you can identify what the problem is. But if there's bad governance, somebody doesn't pay for things, somebody's required to, there's corruption in an organisation, that is the ultimate symptoms because you failed to act earlier, and in the example I'm using, you didn't stop yourself from eating the full bag of licorice. You got addicted to things of a cultural way of doing things. And with the greatest of respect, I've come and I'm new to this organisation, but culturally, sitting around the table here, I can compare it to other organisations. I've been
60 seconds, Councillor Howling.
I've been outside of this organisation and I know sufficient that there is significant room for improvement. And I want to have all of the tools available to me, and I know a thing or two about governance. I've advised internationally in Africa and throughout Southeast Asia following the Asian crisis. I've worked in good corporate governance for local governments and corporations, and we've got a lot of improvement to do. So let's use what RiskWest has done, and let's see whether it can feed into an overall improvement that I beg that we start to do. It won't be perfect, but it'll be a start.
Thank you, Councillor Howling. Councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Howling's alternative motion to the vote. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't pass, I have foreshadowed the officer recommendation and we'll move it then. So, councillors, please cast your votes on Councillor Howling's alternative motion. All right, the votes are in. Councillor Howling's alternative motion has failed 3 votes to 6. Those in favour were Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Howling and Councillor Waugh. Those against were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Raison and Councillor Russell. During debate, I foreshadowed that I would move the officer recommendation if the alternative motion failed, so I'm moving the officer and committee recommendation now. Could I have a seconder, please? Actually, before I look for a seconder, I will propose one very, very minor change to the committee recommendation. At paragraph 1 on the second sentence, it reads as follows, that Council requests that the Chief Executive Officer hold a strategic risk workshop with all councillors and ARIC members attending. I might change the word attending to invited because it's just possible that we won't be able to get all 11 elected members and external panel members in the same room at the same time. Hopefully we can, but changing attending to invited, I suppose gives us some wriggle room there if we need it. So that's what I'll move. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, I won't speak for too long because we may have done this item to death by now. There was, during the debate on the alternative motion, there was a bit of discussion as to whether or not there were statements made about the financial performance of the city that weren't borne out by the available evidence. I wasn't at that workshop, but the reason I am saying that is if you look at page 73 of the agenda, you'll see that the following reasons were provided by the mover of the alternative motion at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. And you'll see that paragraph 3 of those reasons, which is published here in our agenda, reads as follows. At the Strategic Risk Workshop on 23 February 2026, statements were made on the previous financial performance of the city. It is essential that only accurate information be tabled at ARIC meetings. The requested documents are a historical record of the recent financial performance of the city. And then if you look at paragraph 2 of the committee recommendation, it refers to the OAG Exit Debrief 2019, OAG Exit Debrief 2020, and the paper tabled under item 7.6, response to notice of motion, be tabled at the June ARIC meeting. That was discussed at some length at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting on the 10th of March, and that's why I made the arguments that I did. And that alternative motion was passed 6 votes to 1 at the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting. That's all I've got to say. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, anything to say as seconder?
No, nothing further to add, Mr Mayor.
All right. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against the officer recommendation?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Howling.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate the Mayor pointing that out, because what he's in fact referring to is the statements made by at least one of the independent members, Shona, as a basis for why the 2019 reports needed to be introduced. It was not by reference to what was stated in that particular workshop. And that's why you see that the OAG Exit Debrief 2019 and OAG Exit Debrief 2020 in the paper tabled under item 7.6 in response to notice of motion be tabled at the June AIRC meeting. I can't support this. If we are going to look back at the OAG Exit Debrief for 2019 and 2020, then I'm going to want to look at everything surrounding it, including those persons who may have contributed to its drafting. That is, contributed to the Financial Health Index drafting. And all of the details in respect of what is necessary to properly understand the exit debrief of 2019 and 2020. That was the basis for why it was suggested by the independent member, not on the basis of what was contained within the feedback on that particular Risk West report. Not at all. It was a basis for why the new councillors needed to know about the 2019 and 2020 OAG exit debrief. There was no proper basis to that suggestion whatsoever contained within that particular meeting. It was a suggestion without any particular merit. I can't support us going back to 2019 and 2020 without me undertaking a necessary review, either by requesting all of the relevant documents to the exit debrief and all of the Financial Health Index, as well as reasons for why it was done, what was dispersed, or how the health index came to be represented as it was, who did it, when they did it, why they did it, and I want to know the detail. And if I do, then I will be able to understand a little bit more about why we have to look at this, because at the moment it's a proposal without any particular basis. I want to understand it, if we're going to do it, and I'm going to want to understand the full level of the detail so I can properly address council, both at the AIRC meeting as well as into the future, for the precise reasons for why the 2019 figures, at least initially, were shown in the Financial Health Index to be, I think, 78 and later, 58 perhaps, and later it was reviewed to much higher, and why the item was audited and undertaken in the way that it was, and what happened with the computer systems and who did this and why. Lots of detail that I want to know about it if we're going to go back that far. There was no proper basis to it being suggested. What you've referred to, Mayor, what was being said for supporting that part of the motion. That's number 2. And I see no reason for why we should adopt that particular part of the motion. So the reason for why I will be asking that council votes against it is because of what is contained in item 2. What is contained in item 2 has a history. If we're only going to be provided one particular document, then I will be asking that we be exposed to everything so that I can make a proper business judgment, I can properly assess it, and I can properly understand it. And I ask for that reason that we decouple these 2 motions when they're put so that we can deal with item 1, which I'm content to vote in favour of, but item 2 I am not content to vote in favour of. And if we do, I'm going to be asking for every last detail to better understand the circumstances in what happened in 2019, because there is history that we have to understand, perhaps.
Well, Councillor Howling, with the greatest of respect, it's my call, not yours, and I don't really appreciate threats being made to this council about you requesting every possible document you can get your hands on. I don't think that's appropriate at all. But you've said your piece. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? No. Okay. There's nothing much for me to say by way of winding up. I'll simply put the officer recommendation to the vote. And we're waiting on one more vote. Oh, is it me? Oh, there we go. Okay, so the votes are in. The officer recommendation has passed 7 votes to 2.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moore. Mr. Mayor, I need to call you up on that. It's a committee recommendation.
Quite right. So the committee recommendation has been carried 7 votes to 2. Those in favour were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Lees, Mayor Milner, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Razon, Councillor Russell. Those against were Councillor Howling and Councillor Waugh. So that concludes item 5. We now move on to item 10.5.2. We now move on to item 11, which is applications for a leave of absence. Councillors, I have a leave of absence application for the period of 1 July 2026 to 17 July 2026 inclusive. Does anyone else have a leave of absence application? Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I please have the 25th to the 29th of May inclusive and the 17th to 28th of August inclusive, please?
Sorry, that's the 25th to the 29th of May inclusive and...
17th.
So 25th to the 29th of May and...
25th to 29th of May and the 17th to 28th of August.
All right, so that's Councillor Bronwyn Waugh, the 25th of May 2026 to 29 May 2026 inclusive, and 17 August 2026 to 28 August 2026 inclusive. Anyone else? No. Okay. In that case, I'll call for someone to move a motion that a leave of absence applications received from Mayor Greg Milner for the period of 1 July 2026 to 17 July 2026 inclusive, and from Councillor Bronwyn Waugh for the period of 25 through to 29 May 2026 inclusive, and 17 to 28 August 2026 inclusive be granted. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Razon, and seconded by Councillor Prendeville. Councillors, does anyone oppose? No, then that's carried unanimously. We move on to item 12, motions of which previous notice has been given. That's nil. Item 13 is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice. That's nil. Item 13.2 is questions from members. Councillors, any questions for the administration this evening? Councillor Waugh?
Sorry, thank you. I noticed tonight at item 10.5.2, several councillors referred to the strategic risk workshop and the fact that only half of council attended that, and that there needed to be more engagement. Can I ask, I am aware that there were a number of councillors absent from other workshops, including budget workshops, which I think are quite significantly important. Is there a method by which we can increase participation, either by way of Teams availability or administration reaching out to councillors in respect to those things separately, seeking feedback? Because if what I'm concerned about is obviously 3 councillors raised this as a concern that only 5 out of 9 councillors attended. If this is going to become a precedent for future decision making, I'd like to make sure that we've done everything we can to make sure that the processes are inclusive.
Ms Amprimo, can I send that your way?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we can look at Teams attendance potentially. The information is, if there's a presentation, is uploaded onto the hub, and elected members can provide feedback on that. However, some of the value is So ideally, if we can have attendance and if elected members can let us know well in advance, we can try and make other arrangements.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Any further questions, councillors?
Yes, just following on from that, is it fair to say that any such workshop has lesser weight if lesser members attend, and so for that reason does not need to be taken by this council with the same level of seriousness as workshops fully attended?
Ms Ampremo?
It would be up to council to take the information from those workshops as they wish.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Councillor Russell?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Could the city advise how many on-street disabled car bays which are controlled by the city that are not in compliance with the latest version of Australian Standard 2890.5, which was published in the year 2020? Take that on notice.
Ms Ampremo?
Yeah, we'd have to take that on notice, and in fact, we'd probably also need to do an audit to undertake that, to ascertain that.
Okay, and the second part of that question is, what is the city's statutory obligation with respect to provision of on-street disabled parking?
Ms Ampremo?
So we would comply with the standards at the time. My understanding is we wouldn't need to retrospectively meet any requirements. So where there's a particular car park area, we will look at what the requirements are at that location. But I can provide further information to you.
Any further? Councillor Wall?
Sorry, just following on from Councillor Russell's question, I am aware of several disabled bays that are potentially not being used by disabled people. I wonder if you could please provide us with some information as to the city's enforcement of the Act and regulations to ensure that those disabled bays are in fact being kept and used and enforced for those persons who need them. Thank you.
Ms Ampremo?
Yeah, we can get that information and provide it to you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Howling?
Yes, 2 months ago I provided a document on notice in respect of the communications allowance and the provision to councillors of telephones. Can I expect that that would be published with the written answers to the questions?
Yes, you can.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Raison?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Recently, I met with Jeff Baker and one of his policy officers to talk about whether there's anything the state government can do to speed up toilets at the Men's Street Ferry and the Crosswalk. And I understand that Jeff Baker was going to be having a meeting with the city, and I'm interested to know whether there is anything that would enable us, because this is relevant to budget considerations, whether there was any ability or contribution from the state government to speed those two things up.
Ms Ampremo?
I'm happy for them to be taken on notice.
Yes, with respect to the toilets, we are progressing those with the relevant state department. And in terms of the crosswalk on the Esplanade at Main Street, until we go through the design, we probably won't understand what the blockers are to making that happen faster.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Councillor Raison?
Yes, just earlier in the meeting I touched on the questions that were taken on notice in relation to the Collier Park golf course, and that there were a lot of questions there. I just wanted to check whether they will be answered, or is there a more efficient way? There's certainly questions in there that I'm interested in hearing the answer to. One possibility which I flagged in an email to council is whether we actually have a meeting rather than take the time for the 58 or so questions that were put in relation to the golf course.
Ms Ampremo?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there was quite an extensive number of questions, as you noted, and it will take some time for us to work through what the answers to all of those are. There was a brief interim answer provided in the notes, but yeah, there's quite a bit more work to do on providing answers.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Any further questions, councillors?
Yes,
Councillor Howling?
One councillor charges funds for travelling to and from the council meetings. Is that limited to only when you drive to the council meetings, or can you also claim that for riding your bike to the council meetings?
Really, Councillor Howling? I'm disallowing that. Any further questions, councillors? No. And councillors, can we please take these proceedings seriously? There's 46,000 people in this community that are relying on us to deliver good governance. Let's all look like we're trying hard to do that. That takes us to item 14, which is new business of an urgent nature, introduced by decision of the meeting. That's nil for this evening. Item 15 is when we would close the meeting to the public, but the only item that was intended to be done behind closed doors was passed on block, so there's no reason for us to close the meeting to the public. And that brings us to item 16, which is closure. I declare the meeting closed at 9:24 p.m. Thank you all, and good night. Do you want us to still be online?
No.